what happened to her. What a horrible way to go.
I didn't believe it to start with. It was really shocking.
He saw his daughter covered in blood on the floor. It must have been simply horrific.
This happy, horse-loving mother of three was murdered in her own home.
The whole village was rocked by this. Why would anybody do this? Why?
It was a complete mystery.
Were you really under pressure to find out the answers?
What possessed him to do what he did, and why?
This isn't a spontaneous action. He's intended to go there. This is a planned event.
There didn't seem to be any remorse. Nothing.
On the edge of leafy southeast Nottinghamshire lies the quaint, picturesque village of Colston Bassett.
Colston Bassett is your typical affluent rural village. It's got a population of around 400 people. It's got a very low crime rate, and it was recently voted one of the most desirable places to live in England.
A lovely place to live. It's in the heart of the Vale of Belvoir, very peaceful, tranquil, beautiful surroundings.
It's got a sleepy village kind of feel about it, with winding country lanes enveloped by trees and greenery and beautiful houses, and it's just got a really nice feel about it.
We have a dairy in the village. It's the home of Stilton cheese.
It has a village pub, a post office and a little shop. I think quite a close community.
Everybody keeps an eye on everybody else, and everybody seems to get on. If anybody's in trouble or needs any help, then we all step in.
It's one of those places where you go out and people will actually say hello, even if you don't know them, and it's just really nice.
A stone's throw from Colston Bassett lives mother of three, Claire Ablewhite.
Claire loved to ride a horse. She was always out and about on a horse. She lived on a farm. She absolutely loved the little spring lambs, always posting photos of the new lambs, and then started a dog walking business. So she was always out and about with lots of dogs, not just one or two, but always had the time to stand and have a chat with you.
She always had about 6, 7 dogs around her, and I've only got one. So I always call her Mrs. Honeyman. Here you come again, Mrs. Honeyman, Camberwick Green, if you remember the programme.
Even if it was raining, she wouldn't rush off. She would still stand and talk to you with that wonderful smile that she always had.
Yeah, she was a very, very, very nice person.
Soon Claire moves into the heart of the village.
After Claire's marriage broke down, she started a new life in Colston Bassett, getting to know the locals there. The sons are grown up and moved on, so she'd got her own little place, building a business, enjoying where she was. She was enjoying rebuilding her life.
Claire had only lived in the village 6 weeks, but was already well known and well liked.
Claire's not one of the loveliest people I knew. She was the loveliest person that I knew.
But Claire's fresh start after her divorce was about to end in tragedy.
Claire had not been to feed her horses, which was obviously a regular routine.
The neighbour called her son to express concern, and he in turn called Claire's father, who attended her home address.
Her father had a key to the cottage where she lived, so out of concern, he entered with his own key.
The father actually fell over a chair which had been placed in front of the door, presumably to stop people coming in.
And that's when he found chairs had been knocked over in the property. There were smears of blood on the walls. And then he found Claire in the living room, his own daughter lying on one side, facing the fireplace.
He was horrified and saw his daughter covered in blood on the floor. He described seeing her as dishevelled, almost like a scarecrow, of Hair was over her face and blood was matted in her hair, and there was a lot of blood at the scene. It must have been simply horrific.
He did obviously call 999 and life-saving information was given to him.
He did try to revive her through CPR, which unfortunately was unsuccessful. I'm fairly sure that he would have known that there was no way to revive his daughter at that time, but the police were definitely required. It would have been obvious that she was murdered at that time.
Paramedics dash straight to the scene, but Claire is pronounced dead on their arrival. Detectives from Nottinghamshire Police arrive soon after.
The first thing to do is secure and preserve evidence. That's the golden rule, rule number one. There is only one chance to gain evidence from a scene, so it has to be kept as sterile as possible. In these circumstances, clearly the offender had been in there, but also the victim's father, so the scene already had a degree of contamination. So it would have been essential to have preserved that without anybody else going in. They would have taped the scene off, made sure it was secure at the front and the rear so that nobody could access. At this early stage, you're already beginning to think of a hypothesis about what might have occurred and how the victim may have died. You would be looking for weapons that may have been used, anything that's unusual at the scene, whether it's been disturbed, anything unusual about the victim's body, and you have a duty and a responsibility to them and their family to find out who the perpetrator was.
As scene of crime officers comb Claire's cottage for clues, news of the tragedy spreads throughout the village and beyond.
I was actually sat outside in the garden getting some fresh air, and my oldest daughter, she told me that what had happened to Claire, and I didn't believe her. I thought, we're in a rural setting, and I just thought, no, that's wrong. Nobody would do that to Claire. There's no reason for them to do that to Claire.
My friend rang me and told me that Claire had been found dead, and, well, to be honest with you, I didn't believe it to start with. It was really shocking.
Couldn't believe it. It's not Claire, bless her. Is such a lovely person, just a lovely girl. And I can't believe I spoke to her just, the day before I was at the bus stop. Gutted, absolutely gutted. To hear what happened to her. What a horrible way to go.
I think the impact on the community, everybody was just shocked. One, that it could have happened sort of where we live, and two, the fact that it had happened to somebody that we knew was just unbelievable.
Her parents live 2-3 doors away from me, and I just didn't know what to say to them. The whole village was rocked by this. Why would anybody do this? Why?
Soon the local press are on the scene.
The reporters would have gone to speak to residents and just tried to gauge from local councillors and any local police officers exactly what happened, and I think everybody else was in the dark. The general reflection that we got from the community was just absolute sheer shock that she was dead.
Then fear descends as it dawns on locals that a killer is on the loose.
And the fear of not knowing and asking questions in their own homes as to whether it was a burglar or could it happen to them, I think it naturally increases panic within communities. I think there were questions hanging in the air, certainly.
Nobody knew who it was that had done it, so like I say, were they still about? Was it somebody that wasn't from here and had gone, and would they ever find out who it was? So yeah, it was scary.
Soon the village faces an uncomfortable truth. Claire's murderer could be living in their midst.
It would appear the person was allowed entry. Because there was no forced entry to the house, the police were working on the presumption that the victim knew the offender and was allowed access. And in turn, they thought that person may be a local, somebody who lived in the village. And that was the working hypothesis to begin with. So relationships and background work on the victim is paramount at this point as a high priority action. And then working outwards to neighbours, detectives would be appealing for anybody that knew the background of the victim, and they will be checking all those details to see if there are any immediate leads.
People may suspect others among them within the community because it's a close-knit community and because everyone knows everyone else. Certainly they could turn to one another and think, was it my neighbour who was responsible?
But even in this small village, police have their work cut out, pinning down a suspect.
Because it's a quite remote area, it's not busy, so the likelihood of witnesses is very, very low. CCTV is minimal usually, probably limited to people's households, so it's quite difficult to find any on the street, whereas in a city there is a proliferation of cameras. Where there are cameras, lighting and street lighting in rural areas is limited, so being able to see if there is CCTV would be quite challenging. The quality of CCTV may well be quite poor. An initial trawl of CCTV that was available near to the scene didn't reveal anything of any help. Unfortunately, the police found nothing of any value.
Meanwhile, Claire's post-mortem reveals a brutal killing. Her throat was slit, and she had numerous stab wounds to her neck and to her chest. But in another challenge for detectives, there's no trace of the murder weapon found at the scene.
Officers at the murder scene found very little in terms of usable evidence. Scenes of crime officers were able to lift a footprint in blood from the crime scene, but beyond that there was minimal evidence.
So detectives continue to dig deeper, and they uncover something untoward.
There was a mobile phone missing from the victim, which clearly was a priority to find and locate. It was taken for a reason.
Colston Bassett, Nottinghamshire. Mother of three, Claire Ablewhite, has been horrifically stabbed and murdered in her cottage in the heart of the village. Her mobile phone is missing and could provide crucial clues to the killer. While search teams desperately hunt for it in the surrounding area, detectives focus on drawing up a list of suspects.
The pressure starts to build because there's no immediate suspect. And that's challenging because people are looking for answers, particularly the family. People want to know what's happened. People in the village are quite scared. Well, you're really under pressure to find out the answers. She clearly knew the offender. She'd recently split from her husband. She started effectively a new life 6 weeks ago in Colston Bassett and was forming new friendships. So it was very likely that she was having a relationship at some level with someone. The majority of murders such as this are committed by someone who knows the victim. It's very rare for someone to break into a house and then murder somebody at the scene.
So detectives put Claire's online presence under the microscope.
The investigative team became aware of social media activity of Claire, and quickly they became aware that she'd been in contact with a number of people.
She was starting a new life, and it's not unusual for people to go online dating and look for someone else, and her family and friends were aware that she was doing that. I'm sure they were very supportive of her starting out a new life and trying to move on, really.
Claire was moving on in the dating scene, met a few guys that she knew in the village or on a dating app, had a few relationships, nothing serious.
They may well hold some significant information that may lead for the police to further in the investigation. So they compiled a list of around 20 people that they needed to speak to. In a case of this severity and seriousness, individual officers will be tasked as a matter of priority to interview and eliminate each one of these individuals. They wouldn't be suspects at this time, but they would be persons of interest.
Whilst police start trawling through their list, they also turn to the public for help.
A senior officer from the police made a public appeal to check CCTV. Anybody that had any in the area or in the vicinity, they appealed to them to check that thoroughly to try and find the suspect's movements. He got there somehow and he left the scene somehow, and it must have been captured somewhere by someone.
Suddenly, a breakthrough.
A neighbour of Claire's was holidaying in France at the time of this incident, but became aware of the appeal. He then checked his CCTV remotely from France and found a lot of interesting evidence on there. There were movements around the time of the incident, and he'd captured an individual who approached the premises.
The CCTV reveals a grainy image of a hooded man outside Claire's cottage. But that's not all.
These amazing gadgets will alert you to any movements and also record audio. And it recorded audio of the distressed screams of a female. And it also recorded dogs barking at her property, which gave investigators an indication of the time that her killer had arrived at her property. It was about 9:10 in the evening on the night of the killing.
It caught everything the sound of everything that happened in that fatal 2 minutes.
Followed by, about an hour later, the offender leaving the house. This clearly ramped things up, and the neighbour contacted the police. He jumps on a plane, comes back to England, and presents that CCTV to the investigative team. The CCTV from the neighbour is a bombshell. I mean, it throws things wide open, and it gives a very, very clear suspect.
I think a very key piece of evidence proved crucial to this case because it gave detectives a time of the killing and a time of his arrival with the dogs barking.
The CCTV is really important because it gives a timeline. But what it didn't do was show a clear description of the offender himself. He's seen walking with a backpack. He's got his hood up, but he's also covering his face with his hand. So it's quite difficult to determine the identity of the offender at this time.
He was aware of the camera's presence, so he turned his body away from the camera. It's quite eerie that at that moment, the fact that he turned away, was he trying to shield his identity from the camera in that village?
But within the footage, there's a giveaway clue.
They believed that the offender had arrived there on a bicycle. And they did this because when the offender approached the property, he had the backpack with the straps over both shoulders, which indicated they'd probably travelled there on a push bike. Having done that, they then decided to troll back and go through CCTV to see if they could find anybody riding a bicycle or somebody matching that description with the hood and the backpack. The officers can focus more on a particular narrow window of time and look through all the CCTV that's available, particularly in the immediate vicinity, in order to identify that individual.
Sure enough, investigators find more footage that backs up their bicycle theory. On another CCTV camera in the village, they uncover images of a mysterious cyclist and trace his route through Colston Bassett using one telltale sign. His bike has a faulty reflector.
The use of a push bike, again, minimises those opportunities for him to be identified. If he was in a vehicle with registration plates, the chances are he's going to get picked up somewhere. He doesn't end up being caught. He's trying to hide his identity. At this point, it's clear this isn't a spontaneous action. This is a planned event. He certainly intended not to be seen and identified, which would cause me to believe that he intended to go there.
Armed with the CCTV of the cyclist, once again the police appeal to the public for help to try to identify their suspect.
Obviously, whoever did it knew Claire. She let them in the house. Naturally, we automatically think, oh, it was such and such must have done it. She was close to him, or he'd had a reason to do it, it must have been him. But then the CCTV footage came forward. Some people said they recognised him from being in the pub a couple of nights before, or locals had seen him about, but it wasn't who everybody thought it was to start off with.
A number of potential suspects are put forward to detectives.
People were trying to speak to the police as much as they could about anything that they knew or they'd seen her with anybody. So yeah, I think everybody was just trying to be as helpful as they could to try and find who it was.
But detectives still don't have a firm name to the face. In the meantime, there's been an exciting development.
There's another breakthrough, and this is a major breakthrough in the case. Claire's phone is found in a nearby stream. It isn't fully operative, so it's sent for forensic examination.
Investigators hope this will lead them to their suspect.
Mobile phones contain huge amounts of valuable data and information, whether it be from who you know, who you're close to, who you've got relationships with, who you've been speaking to, what the nature of that conversation is, whether there are any threats or implied threats in those conversations, or whether there are romantic links and involvement. There are also the text side of things, both on WhatsApp and numerous other social media chat lines that can be used to further an investigation and establish individuals' relationships, movements, timelines, a goldmine of information, which is why finding that phone is critical to this investigation.
And then the breakthrough really being the advances of being able to crack a phone without a password and then be able to go into the messages and find out the content of those messages and what story had been going on behind the scenes, and showing another side to Claire Ablewhite's life that she was dealing with.
Forensic IT specialists work on Claire's smartphone, eventually hacking into it.
And even though it was in the water and could have had some water damage, they managed to retrieve some messages.
Forensic analysis of the phone reveals WhatsApp messages in a conversation between Claire and a man called John Jessup.
They had been in a romantic relationship previously, and it also indicated that he'd been trying to get in touch with her after she broke things off.
The WhatsApp messages revealed that there was a significant difference in age between Claire and John Jessup. She was 47 years old and he was 26. She became concerned of the age difference and cited that as the reason for breaking up with him. With this information to hand, the senior investigating officer would be able to form the opinion that there was a clear reason for this murder. John Jessup had been spurned by Claire and had clearly taken it badly.
There's another reason police need to find and speak to John Jessup, and fast.
The 20 other individuals she'd been in contact with online, not necessarily in a relationship, but in contact with, had all come forward or all been traced. And it was John Jessup that didn't. So the finger of suspicion points towards him.
In Colston Bassett, Nottinghamshire, police are investigating the horrific murder of mother of three, Claire Ablewhite. Messages have been extracted from her phone found near the scene. They're from an angry, spurned ex-lover. His name, John Jessup.
Detailed background checks of John Jessup showed that he was a 26-year-old man from Newark. He was a factory worker, and he was one of the 20 named persons of interest from the dating app. He was the only man that hadn't come forward to help the inquiry team.
And Jessup's face fits a neighbour's CCTV footage of a suspect seen approaching Claire's home just before her cold-blooded killing.
It was clear from WhatsApp messages that John Jessup had visited Claire's house on several occasions, so he'd be familiar with the area, he would know the points of entry, he'd also know how to evade detection. The analysis of the WhatsApp messages showed the relationship between Claire and John Jessup. They'd been seeing one another for 6 months from September in 2021, but also that relationship had ended in February 2022, some 6 weeks before the murder.
He'd been trying to get in touch with her after she broke things off. There'd been something of a reunion around Christmas time. She bought him a meal at a local pub. He'd stayed over. But then after that, things just went really quiet on her end. Those messages were the things that police could use to obviously give some kind of motive to why this happy, horse-loving mother of three was murdered in her own home.
At this point in time, the senior investigating officer must have breathed a huge sigh of relief. From an investigation that was probably floundering a little bit and lacking direction, they had a really good suspect in John Jessup. And the priority now is to secure and preserve evidence, both the evidence at his home address potentially, of articles of clothing that he would have worn on the night, the push bike that was used, but also his phone that would need to be secured. Because if he is alive to the fact that he's now a suspect, the first thing he's going to do is try and destroy evidence.
11 days after Claire's brutal attack, police nail their man.
They arrested him at work. It's quite dramatic CCTV images that I saw of him actually being arrested. Even though you had very limited CCTV, and it is a tribute to the police who investigated this particular case because they started with very little and they worked backwards and they located this man within 11 days.
Part of the arrest strategy would be to think the long game, because they've got up to 3 days to interview and charge or bail the suspect. So that would have already been pre-planned. Who would be interviewing, the questions they would ask, the evidence and the time of the presentation of the evidence to the suspect.
Jessup's taken to the station for interview.
The interview strategy would drip feed information into John Jessup and into his solicitor. They would start by building the relationship picture and establish that there was indeed a relationship between the two of them. They would then try to identify why that relationship failed, in his words, trying to find a motive. He would have to give an explanation for his whereabouts at that time. And the reality was that he answered no comment to every question that was posed to him. Well, his legal representative would make clear to John Jessup that if he went no comment and refused to cooperate with the investigation, a negative inference may be drawn from that at court and at any subsequent hearing. So he has a reason for that, and the reason is he cannot cooperate, otherwise he will implicate himself.
Whilst questioning of the suspect continues, news of his arrest spreads back to the village.
Probably sense of relief that we didn't know the guy, so it wasn't one of us.
There was a sense of relief that it wasn't somebody local. I think it was a bit shocking as well that he'd come as far as he had and done what he'd done.
We were relieved, obviously, that it wasn't a close person close to Claire, but to find out that it's somebody from sort of 18 miles away who cycled with knowing exactly what he was going to do to Claire when he was alone with her, we were all shocked that why.
In the meantime, detectives have uncovered more damning CCTV, tracing Jessup's movements on the night of the murder.
I guess that was his downfall, really, because he cycled there and back 18 miles from his home in Newark in Nottinghamshire. That ride in the dark was picked up on many CCTV cameras, and it showed him on his bike with his hood up, and then he cycled into Colston Bassett.
The CCTV work identified very quickly some further evidence, and that was John Jessup stopping to buy a pasty at a shop. They could clearly see his face in this.
There was CCTV of him actually perusing the shelves to try and find which pasty to have. Of course, that CCTV put him away from his home and on his way to Claire Abel White's house.
The CCTV shows somebody who is effectively nonchalantly approaching the scene of a murder. And he's stopping for a pasty as though he's just going on a normal day-to-day errand. So it's quite unusual.
It's then that he, instead of eating his pasty, he got back on his bike and cycled into the village. So it took him there and back about 3 hours.
But closer analysis of the shop CCTV reveals more telltale evidence to detectives.
The CCTV scene when John Jessup is buying a pasty shows a very distinctive zip on his jacket. That's also seen on the CCTV from the neighbour's house, which provides a very clear link between John Jessup and the crime scene.
And that's not all. Detectives now focus on their prime piece of forensic evidence: the footprint found in blood next to Claire's body.
Forensic analysis at the scene of the footprint, when the cast is taken, it will give a very, very accurate impression of the sole of that shoe. Footprints in blood are critical because they will show who was at that scene. It's undeniable that the offender at that scene was wearing Adidas trainers. The CCTV at the pasty shop showed John Jessup wearing Adidas trainers, and these matched the footprint in blood taken from the crime scene.
You've got all the circumstantial evidence building against him, but you haven't actually got him at the scene, and the trainer print in the blood puts in there, and it's in wet blood, so it's after the murder.
To finally seal the deal, police uncover CCTV of Jessup parking up his bike moments before the forensic attack. And the killer's friends reveal to detectives what he did straight afterwards.
When John Jessup left the crime scene, and bearing in mind this was a brutal attack, so he must have been in a highly emotive state, one would have thought, he did no more than cycle back to Newark and go for a drink with his mates, which again speaks volumes to the character of the individual, completely dispassionate and without remorse.
With their evidence pulled together, the team's now on the brink of a major turning point in the investigation.
John Jessup is now prime suspect, purely because they've got him on CCTV, they've got him wearing the Adidas trainers with the zip that matches the CCTV at the scene. They know that he's visited the scene on several occasions, and they also know that he had a relationship which was broken off by Claire, so he is a clear suspect. Even though John Jessup failed or refused to cooperate with the investigation team, they must have had more than enough evidence to charge John Jessup. That evidence was presented to the CPS. The CPS agreed, and he was charged and remanded in police custody, and subsequently remanded to prison.
The investigators now prepare themselves for a full-blown murder trial.
Once a suspect is charged, that's probably sometimes when the real work starts. Then you have to meticulously put together and build that prosecution case to make sure that this offender is brought to justice.
In Colston Bassett, Nottinghamshire, police are investigating the brutal killing of mother of three, 47-year-old Claire Ablewhite. 26-year-old Newark man John Jessup is their prime suspect.
On the 11th of March 2022, John Jessup was charged with murder. The following day, he appeared in court, pleaded not guilty.
With Jessup remanded in custody and the case adjourned for a trial, the pressure's on to prove the evidence against him.
It's quite difficult to really describe the mood and the feeling within the investigation team when it's coming for trial. Everybody hopes they've done the best job they possibly can. We hope that we've got a watertight case, and we think we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, because we have a duty to the victim and also to the family and the friends of the individual to make sure that they do the best job we possibly can and bring that offender to justice.
In the meantime, Claire's finally laid to rest.
I don't think Claire's family actually knew how loved Claire was until this happened. Her funeral procession, the route that it took through the village was lined both sides, all the way along. People just wanting to pay the respects. The church itself was absolutely packed. Hundreds and hundreds of people. She really was the most gentle, softest, caring person out there. I know everybody says that when they've lost a loved one, but Claire was just a beautiful person inside and out, and it was a beautiful service. Lots of people there, but still didn't seem real.
Barely 5 months later, her killer, John Jessup, is once again in the dock at Nottingham Crown Court.
There's no actual description that you could fit to a murderer, because even the most horrific crimes, you look at that person standing in the dock and they would just not look like they were capable of doing something so evil. So looking at John Jessup the first time, he just looked completely normal. His hair was, cut and nicely kept, and he had a t-shirt on and jogging bottoms. He just looked normal. And of course, what jumped out to me really was that he's only 26. So at the time, you didn't naturally just conclude that they were in a relationship.
This is when legal affairs reporter Rebecca Sherdley first learns about the case.
I guess at the time I was just thinking, did he try to burgle a home? Was he a gardener? How did he know her? To anyone on the outside who didn't know the family, it was a complete mystery.
But with the evidence stacked against him, Jessup has a surprise in store.
So John Jessup was listed for plea. So very unusually in murder cases, he appeared and he pleaded guilty to her murder. They didn't want to sentence him straight away. Her family needed to write victim impact statements, so they often adjourned for that, and any psychiatric or psychological reports that they needed. So he went off for sentencing, and that was put back right over Christmas. So the family really had the agony of Christmas, waiting for him to be sentenced.
2.5 months later, Jessup finally returns to Nottingham Crown Court to hear his fate.
There was quite a lot of anticipation with him appearing, because I think this was the first time you actually got to see him properly. The last hearing had been very brief, whereas this hearing, the real facts would come out as well about what happened, because we didn't really know still. The villagers didn't really know what had happened, and it was reporting it for the first time. And again, he just looked completely normal. He didn't look any difference from the last appearance. That's when we first heard what John Jessup did to Claire Ablewhite, and that was the first, I think, anyone really knew or heard the full story.
The court learns how Jessup and Claire met online, had a brief 6-month relationship before Claire decided to cool things down.
There was something else going on there with this man that perhaps to her at 47, she didn't think was anything particularly serious, but he obviously took it more seriously. For whatever reason, she decided that she didn't want to see him anymore, or she wanted to break off contact. But he did that really long bike ride to ask her why she wasn't replying to his messages, because he couldn't get through to her on the phone.
But it seems Jessup's intention wasn't just to talk.
The prosecution counsel would show that by deleting Google Apps from his phone the day before he travelled, he was trying to cover his tracks. The significance of this is that he probably plotted a route for his pedal cycle to evade detection, and he probably wanted to erase any data that showed GPS tracking through satellite. Either way, he's trying to cover his actions, and he's premeditated.
The prosecution said there was some premeditation to what happened, because he left his home and he left his phone there to give himself an alibi.
The fact that Jessup left his phone at home on the night of the murder speaks volumes. It shows that he didn't want to be seen, or his movements to be seen. If he'd gone to Claire's, they could have pinpointed him through cell site triangular analysis, his exact movements. He would know that, which is why he left it at home.
Now the prosecution outlines what happened next.
When John Jessup arrives at the house,
She answers the door in a grey t-shirt and a dressing gown, so she's obviously preparing to go to bed. Whatever happened at the front door, no one will actually know, but that audio from the neighbour's camera is crucial in this case, because not only have you got the build-up on the CCTV to him arriving at the scene, you also have that crucial audio of him actually going to the door and those screams of Claire Ablewhite in her home as he confronted her. And then it seemed as though there was a struggle.
Immediately after entering, he attacks Claire, he punches her several times.
Chairs have been knocked over and blood smeared on the walls, and then from somewhere he'd got the knife.
He stabs her in the chest and he cuts her throat. It was described as brutal and relentless, and it was a really severe, violent attack. The man must have been in a rage.
They could not prove where the knife had come from, whether he'd taken it with him or he'd used one at her house, and that was the difficulty in that case. They never found the murder weapon, but it was a knife, and it was sharp trauma injuries to her neck that ultimately led to her tragic death.
The fact that John Jessup remained at the crime scene for an hour tells me that he spent that time protecting himself, disposing of any evidence that may implicate him.
And then he's taken her phone, which he must have known linked her to him, and he's dumped it in the stream.
Next, the court hears the killer's side of the story.
Having pleaded guilty, John Jessup's King's Counsel would present his defence or try to mitigate the act of murder.
He explained on his behalf how John Jessup had been adopted from the age of 2 and, you know, had a really quite normal upbringing from a loving family.
He played tennis. He was well thought of in his local tennis club. He was a high standard tennis player, well regarded by everybody there, and to them, totally out of character, the things that he'd done.
There were no previous convictions except for a caution for criminal damage. There was nothing else on his record that indicated he was capable of this violence.
John Jessup's legal representative claimed that he had gone there on the spur of the moment and only had gone to seek an explanation for breaking up with him. And that was his mitigation.
But her life was taken so needlessly and on a whim because he didn't get answers to his phone calls or his text messages, and that's her right as a woman.
The final word, though, comes from the judge.
When a judge sentences a defendant, they are asked to stand up, and that's where John Jessup stood up. Apart from looking pale and a little drawn, I would just say that he didn't really show any emotion whatsoever.
John Jessup was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 17 years and 8 months to be spent in prison.
He'll spend a massive chunk of his life in prison. His demeanour was just impassive. He didn't shake, he did not cry, he didn't do anything. I think if he showed some remorse, then it would at least give something back to the family that he was sorry, and he didn't. He did not come across as being sorry for killing her.
Back in Claire's village, her horrific murder has left an everlasting mark.
There's still days now when it doesn't seem real. I can be driving through the village and think, oh, there's Claire, when I see somebody with a trail of dogs, and it's, I don't know, it's just painful. She's gone. She's left a big hole in the community now. We'll never forget her. She will always be Claire with a smile.
Neighbours summoned the fire brigade, and they found a horrific scene. There in the bedroom was Louise's body.
It was a fire fatality, but things weren't adding up.
The fire was so small, she would have got herself away from it had she been able to.
This was a deliberate fire, deliberately started to try and destroy evidence. Murder was the obvious explanation. Police found a very key name. He was known as a deeply offensively misogynist person.
The messages between them suggested that they had made a deal. That deal went badly wrong.
He's desperate. That desperation pushes him to act in ways that are irreversible. He is losing control, and he knows he is.
He was fueled by jealousy, rage, and sexual frustration. Kensworth is a small village in the Bedfordshire countryside, which is an area of outstanding beauty, right next to Whipsnade Zoo. A very peaceful, quaint little village.
You get a lot of walkers here, horse riders, lots of cyclists, and we moved because it was quiet, it was space, it was green, there was fresh air.
It's very rural, but it's a nice place to live. There's not much to do, but it's still a nice place to live.
It's a typical little village with a church and a tight community, a local school, nice families. Everybody tends to know everybody else.
Because I walk a dog around Kensworth, everyone says hello. Everyone does say hello. But yeah, I know my neighbours, I know them well. There's always someone maybe fixing a car, washing a car. But apart from that, personally speaking, you don't really see lots of people in Kensworth.
This is a bit like, if you've heard of that ship Mary Celeste, there's no one on it. It just floats around and there's no one on it. Well, this is similar here.
The last thing anyone would expect in Kensworth is a murder to happen. This is not some sort of inner city ghetto. This is an idyllic little country village.
We were shopping, me and my wife. A normal day, got a phone call from my neighbour saying, "You better come home, there's a fire in the block." So I've rushed back here, and on the drive, the pathway, all that, there's fire brigade and there's police.
We were on station and the alarms went down for a fire call. So we all mustered to the muster bay to check what the fire call was, and it came through as a building fire in Kensworth, which is quite an unusual call, as Kensworth doesn't have many of this type of incidents. We arrived and there was a gentleman outside sort of showing us where the fire was. It's right at the end of the close, sort of almost onto the woodland area. I could see already smoke coming out of a window, and immediately we knew our job, so we all sprang into action. I went in first through the door with my partner following behind me. And the smoke was sort of down to sort of chest height, very thick back smoke. You couldn't see a lot, but lower level was fairly clear. As I went in, there was a door on my left-hand side, and I approached that door and I saw immediately a flame in the far right-hand corner of the room. I immediately put some water on that fire. I moved further into the room and then saw the actual source of the fire, and there were some curtains and a bit of corner of what looked like a double bed. At that point I couldn't see clearly because there was still a lot of smoke in the room. So I put out that bit of fire and made my way further into the room. I could see a pair of feet at the end of the bed. I immediately shouted to my partner, "I've got a casualty." I moved round to the end of the bed and then I saw a woman lying on the floor in what struck me immediately as a very unusual position for someone to sort of fall into or be in a fire incident. She was lying flat with her legs straight out on her back. Her hair was like straight out behind her, almost as if she'd been dragged. My instinct immediately told me that she wasn't alive and hadn't been for some time, just because of the way her eyes were and the fact that the fire was so small, she would have got herself away from it had she been able to. What went through my head in the first 5 or 10 seconds is something isn't right here. This doesn't look natural. It doesn't look like this fire could have caused her to be in this situation. We want to drag someone out of the building. That's what we're trained to do. At this point, though, part of our training is also we need to preserve evidence. So I had to make a call very quickly, and I talked to my partner very quickly, and we said, this isn't right, we need to leave this. So we went outside of the building straight away, talked to our watch commander, the officer in charge, very quickly. He said, you leave the body where it is.
Soon after they extinguished the fire, and soon after they called me in, this is the unusual bit, because they're like, Gov, something isn't right here.
We weren't sure what had caused the fire, which made us very suspicious of why she was there and in that situation. We looked for smoking materials very quickly. We looked for any other electrical causes, but there was nothing around that sort of suggested how the fire could have started, which made us very suspicious.
When I entered the room and the bedroom where the casualty was located, the crews were passing the information to me and basically saying, Gov, the only thing on fire was the person. Looks like the front of their clothes had been on fire, the bottom of the bed had been on fire, but nothing else in the room was on fire. There was no electrical equipment plugged in, no reason or actions for this fire to have taken place.
Unaware of what is going on inside, when one of the residents, David, tries to get into the flats, he is held back by police.
They just said, it's more than a fire, you can't go in there. And then I turned to my wife and I said, that don't sound great. And with the amount of police and the ambulance and the fire brigade, I kind of like said to my missus, that ain't good. You don't get that amount of services if someone is broken their arm. I'm like, hold on a minute. Why is all these old built here for a fire? Police don't show up for fires. There's 2 police officers guarding the main security door and then more officers inside. I said, well, what's happened then? And he said, we can't say what's happened. They just wouldn't tell me nothing. They said, you're gonna have to go. I went back across the road, that's where everyone was being held, in that block across the road. I went back over there and I said, what's happened? And someone said that they don't know exactly what's happened. Bloody hell, my arm is standing up. It's the first time I spoke about this. They think Louise has been hurt. They don't know word for word what's happened. It's just what they're getting off of the police, the fire brigade and the ambulance, that there's a body up there that's been found in a bad way, and they believe it to be Louise. And I'm like, wow, hold on. You know, because she never hurt anyone.
The body is that of single mum of 2, Louise Rump.
Well, Louise was a lovely, bubbly, effervescent, pretty intelligent girl. She was 29.
She was described by her family as a real star, full of life and energy. She was a person who would light up any room that she went into.
First time I met Louise, she came in with her babies, and I said, look, hi, I'm David. If you need any help moving in, fixing anything, just give me a shout. My first impressions were, she's quiet, shy. That was just the first impression. I didn't form an opinion of her after meeting her for the first time, like on the communal staircase. As time went on, and I started to talk to Louise, like, good morning, da-da-da-da-da, I could tell Louise was shy. Unless you saw Louise, you knew, only time you knew she was in, because there was no noise ever come from her flat. She had some friends coming around once in a while, not often. Mostly I used to see Louise doing a school run with her youngest child, because they just started to go to school.
I
On Friday the 16th of October, Louise had dropped off her 2 children at school just as she had on every other day of the school week. She was seen to be smiling and happy and seemingly without a care in the world.
But by 12:30 that afternoon, Louise would be dead.
People think firefighters come across dead bodies sort of every day in our work. It's not necessarily like that. And particularly what will stick with me is the way her face was when I saw her. And I will always remember that, to be honest.
I hadn't seen anything like this before. It was very unusual circumstances. There was hardly any clothes burnt and there was hardly any fire situation in the room. This was very suspicious activity. It was, at this time, a fire fatality, but things weren't adding up.
In the quiet Bedfordshire village of Kensworth, neighbours are shocked by the news of the death of 29-year-old mum, Louise Rump.
It's the stuff you bloody see on TV. It's like these programmes you see. You never think it's going to be your neighbour.
Louise's body was found by firefighters responding to a report of smoke pouring from the window of her flat, but they don't believe that the fire was the cause of her death.
The scene itself, the things that stick out to me was the way her body was positioned in an unnatural position for someone to have been involved in a fire, laying flat down on your back, legs straight out, hair behind you. There wasn't a great deal of fire damage in the building. There was a small amount to the curtains and the bed. It doesn't look like this fire could have caused her to be in this situation. The fire was so small, she would have got herself away from it had she have been able to.
Priority for the fire service is to save life, but where they found a body in such circumstances, they've immediately called the police. There's a lot of talk in the police world about the golden hour. Well, in this case, the police were literally there within the golden hour. Once the police have cordoned off the scene with the tape, they will put a scene guard on there. It's vitally important that they preserve the scene as it was, so that the forensic officers can then come in and carry out their investigations and their examinations. It must have been scary for the neighbours to see first the fire service turn up and then the police, and then to see crime scene tape go around the flat. They must have been clearly worried that something serious had happened.
Every morning, the police would see me come out of my flat and still take my name. What was I doing here? You know, everything was recorded. Everything. Anyone that come in or out, even my delivery, takeaway, had to come stop at the cordon and get walked in by the police. There was big security, lots of police presence, lots of different forensic officers coming in and out. And then flowers start appearing outside either side of the properties.
With Louise's flat now a crime scene, police and fire investigation teams make an alarming discovery.
At the crime scene, forensic officers found a plastic bottle which they believed had been used to store some kind of accelerant which was used to start the fire.
It appears the accelerant has been poured directly onto Louise's body.
Her clothes had sort of flashed partially away, so to explain that, it's like when you put fuel on something, it will burn off quite quickly if you set fire to it, so it doesn't always necessarily catch fire. I don't know if you've ever tried lighting a fire, sometimes it can actually be quite difficult. So it looked like the fumes had burnt off very quickly off of her clothes, but not actually caught hold of her body and burnt her away as perhaps was intended.
When the pathologist report is returned, it confirms that investigators are not only dealing with arson.
At the post-mortem, the cause of death was given as asphyxia. This could have been strangulation or smothering. Louise also had other injuries on her body which were consistent with an attack. She had bruising to her face, her left hand, her wrist and her pelvis.
The body showed signs that it had been repeatedly punched and beaten. Particularly her face had been beaten, one of her wrists, wounds suggesting that she'd thrown her hand up to try and ward off the blows, and her back and pelvis had also been beaten. And of course, finally the body had been set alight But this attempt to destroy the evidence clearly failed because it was clear what had happened to Louise and what the murderer had inflicted upon her.
There is little doubt that Louise has been the victim of a vicious and sustained attack, resulting in her death.
It must have been horrifying. This was a deliberate fire, deliberately started with accelerant to try and destroy evidence.
Detectives need to establish who would want to harm Louise, to take a closer look at her life.
My first thoughts at turn up at a scene like this isn't one of, is this a serial killer? It's just, let's find out what has happened. Let's find out who the offender is, and let's find out more about the victim. If you find out how a victim lived, you may find out how they died.
What about her past relationships, her current relationship, her family, her relatives, who she was in contact with, and build up a picture of who was Louise Rump and who was it who could possibly have murdered her.
The majority of murder victims are killed by offenders who they actually know.
With nothing in Louise's life seeming out of the ordinary, police turn to the public for help.
From house-to-house inquiries, a witness was identified who saw 2 cars leaving the vicinity of the flat just before the smoke was seen.
So that was immediately suspicious.
It's important to find out who those cars belong to and why they were in Kensworth at that time.
While police start seizing CCTV in the area, neighbours reveal they had seen Louise that morning.
It was quickly established that Louise had dropped her kids off at school that morning and then went back to her flat.
From interviewing neighbours and relatives, they quickly found that the last time that they could pinpoint Louise being alive was about 11:15. So from that moment, they had a window between 11:15 and the moment the fire broke out and the fire brigade was called.
Scrutiny of Louise's phone records corroborates this timeline.
Police found texts on Louise's phone in conversation with her cousin. This conversation was the last known contact anyone had with Louise.
This text message at 11:12 a.m. is a very good reference point because we know Louise was alive at that time. The fire brigade were called at 12:30, so that's quite a narrow time frame when we know Louise was alive and then she's been murdered. So it's crucial that we tie down everybody's movements in that village in that short period of time.
Armed with this new information, detectives are able to focus their CCTV trawl.
Louise's flat was in a very quiet and isolated area. There was only one road in and one road out. This allowed the police to quickly target suspects.
If the offenders are not in the village, they must have left one way or the other.
And they strike gold.
2 cars were caught on a shop's CCTV, leaving the area shortly after the fire brigade had been called at around 12:30 p.m. This matched the witness testimony of 2 cars leaving the area at around that time.
The cars are registered to 2 men from nearby Toddington, Habib Jackson and a man he is in business with.
Habib Jackson was a 32-year-old male from Toddington. He worked in security with his friend and business partner in Houghton Regis. Another tool that police use is ANPR, Automatic Number Plate Recognition System. In this case, police were able to analyse it, and it showed that both cars left Toddington and arrived at Kensworth around 11:15 a.m. They also left Kensworth and went back to Toddington around 12:30 p.m. This put them right in the time frame when Louise was murdered.
Police then found CCTV footage which showed a male, which they believed to be Habib Jackson, walking towards Louise Rump's flat shortly before 11:15 a.m. at the time of her murder.
Further inquiries into Louise's life reveal shocking new information.
Habib Jackson was an ex-boyfriend.
The discovery is highly significant. The police will need to speak to that person straight away, because if they're not the killer, they may have information which could lead to the identification of the killer.
I remember the first time I met Jackson, I was coming in from getting some stuff out of my van, he was coming in with Louise. Funny enough, he said, "Oh, I'm Habib. I'm Louise's boyfriend, new boyfriend." I'm like, okay, it's a bit weird. I've just met you, a bit weird. But anyway.
I think the turning point in the investigation, when you consider police arrive at a scene, find a dead body, what is the moment that sparks the hunt directly on? And I think once they had Jackson's name through registration and identification, and they found out that he was the ex-boyfriend, that immediately put him #1 prime suspect.
This is where the investigation really moved up a gear.
It is less than 24 hours since the burnt and beaten body of Louise Rump was found in her Kensworth home, and police already have a suspect, Habib Jackson.
Louise and Habib were in a relationship from 2016 to the latter part of 2019 when they split up.
Jackson has been captured on CCTV in the vicinity of Louise's flat at the time police believe she was killed.
And the police must have known that within a matter of hours of finding the dead body. And that is a huge breakthrough at such an early stage in a murder hunt.
As they follow CCTV of Jackson's route out of Kensworth, detectives witness the car stop.
At 12:31, Jackson was on CCTV driving away from Louise's flat, and shortly afterwards he was caught on CCTV again, stopping his car by the roadside and dumping a cardboard box. When police went to the scene, the cardboard box was found to contain Louise's jumper.
When police recovered the box and the jumper, they forensicated it and found samples of Louise Rump's blood on the jumper itself. We know that Louise suffered a horrific attack. It was very violent, and blood found on an item taken away from the scene is indicating to the police, this is your suspect, this is your killer.
Within 24 hours of the murder, the police were pretty sure that they had their man.
Once police reviewed all the evidence that they had gained from their fast-track actions, they quickly raised Habib Jackson to suspect status. They went round to his house the very next day to arrest him on suspicion of the murder of Louise Rump.
I think Jackson was clearly the prime suspect, but equally his business partner was in the frame because he was believed to have been at the scene as well, and they were a double act. They went everywhere together.
In custody, Jackson's colleague gives little away.
He was advised not to speak to the police at all in interview.
Jackson, on the other hand, is quick to deny he is involved in Louise's death.
When he was first questioned by police, Habib Jackson said he wasn't at Louise's on the day of the murder.
Jackson told police that he and Louise had an on and off relationship. He said he'd been to the flat previously, but on the day of the murder, he claimed that he'd been nowhere near her flat.
The first thing that the police noticed when Jackson opened the door was that he had a vivid scratch under his right eye, which indicated that he'd been in some sort of incident recently. Jackson told them that, no, he hadn't been at the house that day, but he had previously, and they'd had a sort of play fight, but this was going back to February, which is many months earlier. What was clear to the police was that the scar under the right eye was not a wound inflicted some months earlier. It was far too fresh for that.
I believe this was Habib Jackson trying to cover up the fact that he was injured by Louise while he was attacking her. When interviewing a suspect and you catch them out in a provable lie, it only makes the interviewers more determined to get to the truth and put all the evidence to the suspect. At the end of the day, an innocent man can't lie. Once Habib Jackson is arrested, his house becomes a scene. The police need to search that thoroughly to find any evidence which may link him to the murder of Louise. There was evidence that Habib Jackson went to his place of work in Houghton Regis after the murder, so police carried out a search of his workplace. During the search, they found a phone belonging to Louise in a waste bin. They also found clothing belonging to Habib Jackson As well as setting a fire at the scene of the murder, Habib Jackson also disposed of clothing and a phone. This was a continuation of Habib's actions in trying to cover up his involvement of the offence. He was trying to destroy forensic evidence and cover his tracks.
Police questioned Jackson about the bottle of accelerant found at Louise's flat.
Jackson admitted that he did, in fact, have the bottle of accelerant on him in the house, but he claimed that he had it in order to start a bonfire at a later date.
Jackson was later to admit that he had a similar such bottle, which he carried around with him in his car.
In which case, why was it inside Louise's flat?
The fact that a bottle of an accelerant was taken to the scene shows a large degree of premeditation. I can think of no other reason why he would have taken that bottle into the flat.
With Habib Jackson and his colleague now under arrest, time is of the essence for detectives.
There is pressure on investigators when you've got somebody in custody for murder, because essentially the clock is always ticking.
They only have an initial 24 hours in order to question and gather evidence in order to either charge or release it. Police brought in a specialist officer to analyse all kinds of data.
Passive data inquiries can include anything from CCTV, phone inquiries, ANPR, anything electronic such as your computer, your Wi-Fi router, even down to the telematics in your own car. In this case, the police used a DMI, a digital media investigator. The DMI went into Louise's flat and recovered her Wi-Fi router. The Wi-Fi router showed that Habib Jackson's phone entered Louise's flat at 11:14 a.m. And when you overlay that with the ANPR and the CCTV of Habib's car coming to the location, Habib's car going away from the location, and the fact that he hasn't reported his car or his phone stolen, you can be very confident that the person with the phone going into her flat at 11:14 was Habib Jackson.
This specialist officer also found that Louise Rump's phone had been disconnected from the router at 11:51. This suggested that her phone was turned off at this time. Another phone she owned was turned off just a few minutes later.
I would suspect that Louise had been murdered by that time. Only Jackson knows why he switched off her phones, but along with the setting of the fire and the removal of property from Louise's flat, it was just another poor attempt at covering up his tracks.
Habib Jackson and his business partner are charged with the murder of Louise Rump.
Both pleaded not guilty, and so both were committed for trial by jury.
It's now down to police and the prosecution team to build a case for trial, so they look deeper into Louise and Jackson's relationship.
Jackson had been her ex-boyfriend, and on Louise's phone and through WhatsApp messages, they found a lot of links that the couple were still in contact together. Jackson and Louise had broken up about a year before the murder, but Jackson had spent many months prior to that trying to rekindle their relationship, but without success.
This was him fixating on Louise. One of the messages said, "Can't you give me what I crave?" To which Louise replied, "No."
Clearly, Louise had no interest in rekindling their sexual relationship. Indication of the sort of relationship they had when they were together was that Jackson called himself her sugar daddy, which again implies that he wanted to manipulate and control her in return for funding her lifestyle.
He would pay for her gym membership, he would pay for shopping.
I mean, it's absolutely classic manipulation, and the fact that he refers to himself as a sugar daddy, that's quite telling, because what that suggests is he thinks that he's providing love and affection, a daddy, paternal figure, providing care, looking after his little girl, the connotations are there. However, he's not. He's actually a controlling, manipulative, dangerous man who is using his disposable income to actually buy into somebody's life.
There was a certain financial control by Jackson over Louise, but he would always expect something in return.
Jackson would pay Louise for information about her private life, which is the sort of thing that turned him on. That there was an excitable thrill he got from learning this. He kept on at her, knowing that he had the money and she didn't.
So Jackson is using every type of currency that he has over Louise. So you see that the actual physical currency of money, where he's purchasing answers about her intimate relationships and he's purchasing material things for her. So this isn't somebody who's being altruistic. This is somebody who is inserting themselves into Louise's life and exerting that power. I'll buy your shopping because I can. And then that means you have to do things for me. The fact that he invented a game where he was essentially questioning her on her intimate partners, that speaks to exactly what type of relationship he had with her, which is that controlling, that manipulative, that insidious, I want to know and I have a right to know what you're doing because basically I own you.
Detectives discover Jackson's attempts to rekindle a sexual relationship with Louise are relentless.
Among the messages that the police found was one from Jackson to Louise, who said, "Can't you just give in?"
So what he's saying there is, why don't you do as I tell you? Why won't you do as I ask? You know, I need this, I want this from you, and you're the only person who's stopping that from happening. That speaks to an arrogance, and again, that speaks to a narcissism that just because you want something or you want to indulge in an act or a behaviour or you want to be with someone, that they automatically should just capitulate and do as you want. It just speaks to absolute control, but also not understanding and not accepting that humans have rights, women have rights, and if you don't want to do something or with someone or be in a relationship with someone, that's your absolute right, and he doesn't understand or want to accept that.
The unsettling communications between Jackson and Louise continued right up until the day of her murder, when he messaged asking her to perform a pole dance for him.
For Louise, pole dancing was a hobby.
Louise had a pole in her living room as part of the equipment that she would need to use as she was attending pole fitness classes to lose weight and keep healthy.
The messages between her and Jackson suggested that they had made a deal, that he would come to her flat and she would do a pole dance for him. He even said that he would bring the underwear that he wanted her to wear. And this is further evidence of Jackson's controlling nature and the way he manipulated Louise.
Jackson thought Louise would do a pole dance for him in the underwear and the G-string that he required, and that Jackson had hoped this would be the start of rekindling their relationship again. I suspect that Jackson, despite the fact that Louise was telling him no, no, no to going out again, was still keen to do that and still hoped that he could persuade her. He had a certain egotistical vanity, so that he was actually completely convinced of his own charm when it comes to women. And he thought that he could restart everything once they got together. Clearly, we know that Louise wanted nothing to do with that. So what the police came to see, the theory was of what happened, was that Jackson, having been rebuffed, flew into a violent rage of jealousy and started beating her, repeatedly punching her in the face, then strangling and suffocating her to death.
Habib Jackson and his business partner are on trial for the murder of 29-year-old mum of two, Louise Rump.
As a detective, when you reach Crown Court and the trial starts, there's that anticipation, you always have that little bit of self-doubt. Have I done enough? Is there something that I may have missed? And even when the trial starts, you're doing as much as you can to allow the jury to come to a correct decision, whether that be guilty or not guilty.
But the first twist in the trial comes before a single piece of evidence is heard.
Jackson actually refused to leave his prison cell, and the case continued in his absence. For me, this is an indication of the kind of man that Jackson is. When it came to taking account for his actions, he was too much of a coward to even go into the courtroom.
He didn't want to leave his prison cell. Quite clearly, this was because placed in a courtroom environment completely out of his own control, where he had to sit still and shut up in the dock. He was completely uncomfortable with that and didn't want to subject himself to that ordeal, even though it was his own murder trial.
Jackson's colleague and co-defendant is in the dock.
Next to him was an intermediary explaining to him what was going on, which indicates that he had learning difficulties and he couldn't pick up what was clear to other people of the progress and the protocol of the trial.
The relationship between the two men is described in court.
Jackson was reasonably wealthy in so much that he ran his own security firm, which was basically supplying bouncers to nightclubs and doormen to pubs and the like. He had a partner, but he was very much a junior partner who was not the best businessman and basically did what Jackson told him.
The jury hears how Jackson's need to control extended beyond his colleague.
Beeb Jackson was known as a deeply offensively misogynist person. He was known that he was controlling, he was manipulative. He had a sort of contempt towards women he treated as property rather than as someone to conduct a relationship with.
The facts that were presented to the jury were that Jackson had set up a meeting with Louise on the 16th of October. He'd messaged her because he wanted her to perform a pole dance.
But when Louise stood up to Jackson, it seemed he turned.
I think he's desperate. I think that desperation pushes him to act in ways that are irreversible. We hear about the kind of the stereotypical red mist or losing control, but essentially he is losing control and he knows he is. And no doubt having that conversation where he sets up this ridiculous game of having Louise reveal some of her intimate relationships or intimate encounters since him, that just induces rage. Because not only has she said no, now she's giving evidence where she's, in his mind, saying no to him because she's saying yes to someone else. And that, for Jackson, is just intolerable, and he cannot cope with that.
One final damning detail is revealed to the court.
The most alarming aspect of their relationship, particularly when they broke up, was that Jackson was more than willing to tell anybody who was prepared to listen that if he couldn't have Louise, then no one would.
It's territorial and it's speaking to property. It's dehumanising Louise. It's taking Louise from a sentient, beautiful, happy young mum to a piece of property, an item that belongs to Jackson. It's the old adage, when I show you who I am, believe me. You know, when people say things like that, if I can't have someone, no one can, you really need to take that very, very seriously, because we see domestic homicides on the back of those comments time and time again. It has been stated that the reason Jackson attempted to set fire to Louise's body was to hide evidence. I think it was more than that. I think it was to desecrate, to destroy what he could not have. So it wasn't simply enough to asphyxiate and beat Louise. He had to absolutely destroy his property, you know, this beautiful young woman, because she said no to him, because she challenged him, because she didn't do exactly what he wanted, and therefore he destroyed her. And I believe he did that to absolutely just destroy and desecrate every part of Louise, because Louise said no. And when Louise said no, then we see the consequences of saying no to Habib Jackson.
When a jury are out considering a verdict, it's quite a nerve-wracking time because you really have no idea what verdict they're going to return. Because at the end of the day, we're all human. As a detective, you know your case from your point of view, but it's only right that independent men and women review the evidence and then come to a decision to which they're all agreed. So you have no control over that, and you just don't know how your evidence or the case has come across to them.
With all evidence having been presented to the court, the jury first turned their attention to Jackson's business partner.
The fact was that they had no evidence against him, other than the fact that he had driven with Jackson to the scene. No evidence that he had got into the flat. No evidence linking him to Louise at all. It was a very limited case, and the jury's decision must have come as no surprise that they would find him not guilty.
The jury came to the conclusion that it was Jackson alone who was responsible for Louise's death.
Habib Jackson is found guilty of the murder of Louise Rump and sentenced to life imprisonment. He will serve a minimum term of 23 years.
Sentencing Jackson, the judge was absolutely withering in his contempt for the murderer. He described Jackson as a man of primitive and narcissistic egotism in the way that he treated women not as equals in a relationship, but as objects which he could buy in terms of sexual conquest or subject to what Jackson himself referred to as his own charm. The judge told Jackson that he had left 2 small children with the knowledge for the rest of their life that while they had been at school, their mother had been brutally attacked, strangled, smothered, and set afire, leaving them with no mother at all.
I'm 56 years of age, and not once have I witnessed anything as barbaric as what happened to Louise. When I found out that the geezer that done it got found guilty, I was pleased. Personally speaking, I still think an eye for an eye, but a big bit of bird should serve him well. But it's never going to be long enough because you can't bring Louise back.
The lasting impact on the family will be massive. You've got 2 young children there who are now going to grow up without their mother. As far as the local community, it's already had a devastating effect.
I really can't get my head round how someone wants to, especially a woman, how a man wants to kill a woman. I just can't get my head round it. It makes no sort of sense at all, leaving all their family to fend for themselves. I mean, how can you do that?
For Louise's friends, her death leaves a void in their lives.
Louise was a fun, outgoing and very caring friend who loved her children more than anything. She was a very shy girl. She always made sure she looked her best, even for the school run. She didn't deserve what happened to her at all, and the kids are now left without their mother just because of some jealous man.
It was just frightening that something serious had happened on our doorstep.
This was a crime of passion. Everyone was gripped by it and wanted to know what happened.
It's quite unusual for somebody to have this sexual preference, but it's also extremely dangerous.
To hear someone doing that, stabbing someone ferociously when they're dead or dying, it was something quite horrific.
There's a heavy price to pay for that, all because of jealousy.
This was an unusual murder. It had sex, violence, jealousy, betrayal. It had all the hallmarks of a crime thriller.
My mum is heartbroken. She'll never be the same person ever again.
A quiet Sunday morning in the sleepy Hampshire district of Lee Park.
At 8 o'clock in the morning, the police received a 999 call from a very distressed young lady.
Somebody's had their throat slit at an address in Lee Park.
The police had to go to the house very quickly.
Having a call of this nature is highly unusual. Is this false and malicious? Is this somebody just having a prank on the police's behalf? I think the officers will be going there with an open mind, but with some trepidation as to what are we going to face when we get to this address. Police arrive at the address and they knock on the door. They can hear dogs barking and the door is opened.
Hello. You all right?
Yeah.
What's going on?
The police officer went inside the house.
Don't close the door.
One of the officers goes upstairs.
Had some kind of strange, interesting call about somebody having had their throat slit.
And they find a body in the bedroom.
The residents of Botley Drive soon find out something is afoot.
The place was swarming with police vans, police cars, whatever. They were all over the place.
You know, you couldn't see this side of the road because all the police cars were parked there, and you think something's happened.
It was quite overpowering, and you sort of wanted to know what was going on, but you didn't want to ask.
And you could see the activity, scenes of crime, and pathologists and all that sort of thing were there, and it was just frightening that something serious had happened on our doorstep.
Word spreads to the local Portsmouth press.
So we received a tip-off that there was a serious incident taking place in Botley Drive. We sent a reporter out to go and investigate. The reporter went down to the scene, spoke to locals in the area. So it's quite clear this was a major incident. So there's lots of rumours swirling around. Some people thought possibly a stabbing, but it was all a big mystery.
The house is sealed off and the crime scene secured.
Normally when a police tent and cordon is erected, it normally means one thing, which is that someone's been killed.
The last thing on my mind was that it was a murder. To find out at the end that it was somebody had been stabbed, you know, it was quite shocking.
Yeah, it's awful. It's right on your doorstep. Think of it not happening in this area, but one day it could be.
Everyone just said, oh, there's loads of police, I don't know what's going on. And then that's when the speculation came and the rumours came.
No one actually knew what had happened. It was just an incident that caused a lot of fear, basically, and shock. There's a lot of questions being asked. People were concerned, and some people felt unsafe as well because potentially there was a murder on the loose. So it was an incident that brought the community together and caused a lot of concern.
Soon, senior detectives arrive on the scene.
In the background, there'll be checks going on. You know, do we know anything about that address? Is it an address we go to on a regular basis? Are there people living at that address that the police will know that they've dealt with before? You go with an open mind, but if there's no information coming back to suggest that, you know, this address is well known, we're always going there for domestics, you need to sort of have your wits about you.
At this address in Botley Drive lives 27-year-old mother of one, Shay Groves.
She had a young child who was 5 years of age. She was living with a friend. She wasn't working. From the age of 11, she was wearing hearing aids in both the ears because she was partially deaf.
In the last 6 months, Shay's been in a relationship with dad of 2, Frankie Fitzgerald.
In February 2022, they met at a pub in Cosham, and it looks like they clicked. He sent her a number, she rang him. At that stage, she was just getting out of a relationship, but she wanted something exciting, and Frankie came along and gave her the excitement.
But investigators uncover a string of texts, suggesting all is not well with the budding romance.
There was evidence of Frankie being dominant towards Shay. There were lots of text messages to Shay telling her what to do.
He had a jealousy towards Shay Grove's ex-partners, and he felt that she was actually seeing other men behind his back. There was a sense of distrust. She distrusted him because she still felt that he was still going out and getting in touch with his ex-partner.
It was established that around about April time, so 4 months into the relationship, that by now it really deteriorated, where Frankie's obsession and jealousy was getting worse and worse. Quite often it would end up in a really heated argument, to the point where we know Frankie had threatened violence against Shay and also threatened violence against her ex-partner as well. So much so that Shay was concerned that she shared this information with her friend because I think she feared for her safety at times.
A background check on Frankie reveals he has history.
In the past, there were cases of domestic abuse that the police had investigated, and I think he'd been convicted on one occasion.
Frankie had been before the magistrates' court in 2018 because he had sadly assaulted his ex-partner. And not only that, he had also damaged a mobile phone, the consequence of which he pleaded guilty to assaulting the ex-partner and stealing her mobile phone. There was a restraint order against Frankie imposed in 2018 that he should not be in contact with the ex-partner.
As details of the couple's relationship emerge, it's not long before police confirm they are in fact dealing with a murder.
The body is wrapped up in a duvet on bin liners in the bedroom with serious neck injuries that were non-survivable.
In Lee Park, Havant, at the home of 27-year-old Shay Groves, Hampshire Constabulary have discovered a body. The victim, 25-year-old Frankie Fitzgerald. The father of 2 has been stabbed 20 times.
Frankie underwent a forensic post-mortem. This is whereby an autopsy is carried out and forensic evidence is also captured from the deceased, but also a trained pathologist can try and interpret some of the injuries. And what was noted was that Frankie had had this fatal blow to the neck, but then there was also 19 other injuries around the chest area that wouldn't have been fatal because he was probably already dead by the time the first stab wound went into the neck.
The evidence would have suggested that effectively the main cutting that caused his death occurred around the throat area because it went across from left to right and cut the voice box, putting it simply. And then it caused torrential bleeding. It was so fierce, he would have bled out.
While forensic officers continue to comb the scene, a police presence is stepped up in the area to calm this close-knit community reeling from the news.
It's frightening to think that that sort of thing happens. And it's a real friendly neighbourhood.
It was a sort of strange quietness, like you'd lost somebody. It was like a cloud had come down over everything, and everybody was under that cloud.
Several miles from the murder scene lives Frankie's family. tragically unaware of the events unfolding in Lee Park.
I was at my mother-in-law's having a barbecue. Then my mum turned up and the first thing she said to me was, "Have you heard from Frank?" And I said, "Mum, he's probably asleep." I said, "He's probably sleeping a hangover. His phone was off, his phone's never off." My mum was probably there for about an hour when she got a phone call from the police to say, "I'm ringing about your son." And my mum said, "What one?" And they said, "Frankie." So I took the phone and they said, "Is this Carla Frankie's sister?" And I said, "Yes, like what's going on?" So they said, "We need to come and see you."
The police officers make their way to the family home.
We was outside and my mum was obviously pacing up and down. They asked us to go inside and go into the bedroom. And the words that they used was, "We found a deceased man in a house in Havant with a slit to his throat." And my mum just collapsed on the floor. And I was just shouting, saying, no, this is not true. It was just bizarre, like, my little brother's been murdered. I still can't get my head around it, but it was just awful seeing my mum like that.
He had 2 children from previous relationships, and yes, in the past he was known to the police for domestic abuse, but it appeared that he'd been turning his life around. He'd moved on. He had a good relationship with his children and a good relationship with his children's mother.
He was an amazing dad. He always went out of his way to get what they needed or to see them and take them out for days. There wasn't a day really that I didn't see him. I just miss his big grin he had on his face, knocking my door really loud. And I'd know it would be Frankie knocking, or when he went slamming the door. He was just amazing, and he didn't know how amazing he was. And I wish I could tell him.
The family were absolutely devastated, but everyone was rallying round to help the family, help his friends, and to raise as much money as possible for his funeral.
Meanwhile, detectives have been focusing on the bedroom where Frankie's body was found. Items discovered at the home of girlfriend Shay Groves begin to ring alarm bells.
She had numerous pictures on her wall of famous killers. You had Charles Bronson, Myra Hindley, Rose West, the Yorkshire Ripper, numerous books. This is not normal.
Shay was someone who had an interest in knives. She had axes.
And scenes of crime officers find a potentially lethal airgun in one of Shay's bedroom drawers.
On the right side of the bed, she had a coffin-style bookcase which had all the gang killings and gangland people and so forth.
It was very dark and twisted, I suppose.
Elsewhere in the house, even coffee cups reveal this morbid fascination.
Shay Groves was someone who was obsessed almost with true crime documentaries. She had a fascination with serial killers, killing.
We've noticed from looking at previous social media pictures that over the last couple of years, her appearance started to change. She went from wearing sort of bright clothes and being sort of quite outgoing to started going in on herself and becoming almost gothy. Dark clothing, lots of dark makeup. She started to have tattoos, very visible tattoos. So visible you can see them on her face and on her neck. So there's obviously something going on in the background there that's making her change her appearance like that.
She became a god as we understood it, as a result of her becoming friendly with a partner who was her boyfriend around that stage. They were both goths. They had a weird sense of humor in a sense that they were dressing up in goth clothes and all that. They also were practicing pagan practices, and she had a Celtic dagger with her, which was supposed to be for pagan practices.
Back at the crime scene, police uncover more disturbing evidence.
Also within Shay's home were a number of CCTV cameras, Now, ordinarily, a CCTV camera would be facing the outside and it will be there as a crime prevention type of mechanism to stop intruders breaking into your house. But what was particularly strange about this case is that Shay actually had them set up inside the house.
Shay had CCTV video cameras in her bedroom, in the lounge, in the kitchen. The ones in the bedroom were used to record her and Frankie having sex. They would then watch these videos back and then carry out what they had seen.
The police recovered a number of videos.
There were CCTV footage of them committing violent sexual acts together. It involved sexual acts of what's known as BDSM, bondage, dominance, submission, and masochism.
What we established that was common between the two of them was that they had this almost unhealthy sexual interest, and it's unusual to try and find a partner that has the same sort of sexual preference as you. So the fact that these two had this thing in common made it quite unique, but also extremely dangerous.
Miss Groves had a passion for kinky sex to the extent that she likes knives being used on her, knives being run over her, and so forth.
One of the elements of there was a thing called knife play. Now, this is where they would act out a sexual act where one of them is in possession of a knife and holding it to the other's throat whilst they have sexual intercourse.
The footage reveals these dangerous sexual games are fueled by Class A drugs.
Frankie and her very quickly got into the habit of cocaine. And cocaine became the center point of the relationships, whereby they were sniffing cocaine and having sex and videoing their sexual acts. They were exploring their sexual acts to the very limit with the use of cocaine and other things.
Shay and Frankie's mutual interest in rough sex and BDSM dominated the relationship. The boundaries became somewhat blurred, I think, with what they were doing. So there'd be a lot of role playing. Shay would be someone who enjoyed being spoken down to and humiliated. Frankie would regularly spank her and talk to her in a derogatory fashion. And this was something that consumed the relationship and was the cornerstone of the relationship.
They signed what's known as a sexual contract. I called it the 50 Shades of Grey sexual contract because it resembled everything of it. In it, it gave Frankie the permission to wake up Shay Groves every morning with sex. It was signed by Frankie Fitzgerald, signed by Miss Groves, and countersigned by the friend.
One of the videos that the police recovered from the address was of a particularly brutal sexual act between the two parties, and that is really, really disturbing. With a knife, one doesn't have to describe any further how high risk that is, particularly when one of the parties or both of the parties may be high on cocaine or alcohol.
As detectives trawl on through Shay's sordid CCTV footage, they're drawn to something rather sinister. Her lethal Celtic dagger appears in the unlikeliest of places.
There were evidence that we found from CCTV footages where she actually puts the knife underneath her bed, underneath a pillow. On one occasion, after sex, Frankie Fitzgerald actually saw the knife. He says, "Why do you have it? Do you intend to stab me in the throat?" And what is the coincidence of Frankie Fitzgerald saying, "I'm going to stab you in the throat," and Frankie Fitzgerald being actually stabbed in the throat later on within a few weeks?
Police have no option but to make an arrest.
What's going on?
Sorry,
No, don't close the door.
They turned up and Shay Groves was there in her pink dressing gown, smoking a cigarette, acting as cool as you like.
This was an unusual reaction. When she was talking to the police officers, she was as if nothing was wrong.
It didn't appear surprising that the police were there. It's almost as if she knew they were coming.
Shay Groves told them that there was a body upstairs.
Absolutely no tears, nothing. No concern for him anything of that nature. It was a chilling video, a chilling body-worn camera to actually watch.
Arrest on suspicion of murder. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence. The necessity for your arrest is for a prompt and effective investigation. Okay.
But when the officers arrested her on suspicion of murder, she didn't put up a fight. She then directed the officers to say where the weapon was. And sure enough, there was this Celtic dagger still in the sink with blood on it.
Lee Park, Havant. 25-year-old Frankie Fitzgerald has been found dead with his throat slit in the bedroom of 27-year-old Shay Groves.
Mum is heartbroken. We haven't just lost Frankie, we've lost our mum too. She'll never be the same person ever again. He was very special. He was special to everyone. And it's just a void that's going to be in the rest of our life. Our hearts are going to be breaking for the rest of our life.
Arrest on suspicion of murder. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention.
Mum of one, Shay, has been arrested on suspicion of murder.
After she was arrested, she was taken to the police station, and at the police station, she was seen by a registered nurse.
Shay was then subjected to a number of police interviews during the course of her time in custody.
She slowly went on to have legal advice. And during the course of the first interview, on the advice of a solicitor, she made no comment.
In the meantime, detectives have been questioning one of Shay's friends. In a bombshell interview, the friend reveals a strange video call she had from Shay straight after the killing.
You then have this bizarre situation where Shay's starting to giggle and saying, "Can you keep a secret? I've done something, can you keep a secret?" And she proceeds to walk upstairs, still on FaceTime with her friend, and then turns the camera to show her Frankie's lifeless body on the floor with clear stab wounds around the neck and says words to the effect of, "I've done him, I've done him." She's always described as having a bit of a weird sense of humour. So initially she's thinking, is this one of these pranks that Shay might pull? You know, is this just some sort of weird thing that she's just trying to pretend that they've had some kind of game and Frankie's pretending to be dead? So she doesn't quite believe her, and you can see why. But Shay then gets the camera phone and actually puts it really close to Frankie's body, so she can really see the graphic images of the injuries that she's caused towards Frankie.
She was showing the blood spots on the books themselves and says, blood here, blood there, blood here. That's what the police officers found. What they also found when the first police officer went up to the room, apart from finding the body, they had this pungent smell of bleach, where there was an attempt to clean up the place, because the friend was telling the police officers when she was being video interviewed that she actually saw her with a bowl with water trying to clean the place. She had taken the camera towards the kitchen area, towards the sink, and shown her the knife where she used the murder weapon.
In the same video call, the friend claims Shay also admitted to stabbing Frankie while he slept. Detectives put this to Shay during her interview.
And so they were putting questions to Shay that effectively she had murdered Frankie in his sleep.
Her attitude during the second and third interview completely changed because she was so arrogant. And she was using words like, "Look, don't waste my time." I'm paraphrasing it. "Don't waste my time. I know what I'm here for."
Strangely, she started talking, and actually one of the questions she then fired back at the police officers was, well, if I killed him in his sleep, why is there no blood on the bed? As we know, Shay was obsessed with true crime documentaries. She would be aware of forensic evidence and how to dispose of forensic evidence. Now, what we do know is that Frankie's body had been moved and been wrapped up in a duvet. So I think the inference there is that it's likely that if Frankie was sleeping, he was sleeping on top of the duvet and he was stabbed, and she's then wrapped him in the duvet and then transported him from the bed to the floor on top of the bin liners. She's forensically aware because of her knowledge of all these true crime documentaries that she watches. She knows that by wrapping the body in bin liners, it's less likely to leak fluid into the house.
Shay effectively leaves no trace of Frankie's blood on the bed.
What is even more interesting about her demeanor was the fact that she's told the police officers, "You will find things about us in the video." She says she had been suffering from the months of sexual abuse that she'd been suffering from Frankie Fitzgerald. The abuse in a sense that it was violent sex. She was raped by him. She didn't consent to rape.
Shaya started to hint that she may have been a victim of sexual violence from Frankie and that this attack was due to her defending herself.
Shay was now trying to form a defence, and that defence was self-defence. So in effect, what she is saying is that she was being attacked by Frankie, and in order to protect herself, she had to inflict harm on him to stop him harming her.
What happened was that he went towards her and grabbed her in the bed and strangled her, and she was losing consciousness. She then struggled to find something to hit him with, and she thought she found a box, and she was trying to hit him with the box. Turned out it was a knife, and she stabbed him. It was sheer arrogance, something that you don't normally find when someone is saying, "I've been a victim of abuse, I've been a victim of coercive control, and I killed somebody." Not a shred of emotion.
Whilst looking into Shay's abuse claims, detectives dig deeper into the background of their suspect. Although she paints herself as the victim, the truth isn't quite what it seems.
We established that Shay would often carry a knife, and she would self-harm on occasions, small cuts in her legs and that kind of stuff. But also she would threaten violence against others, and there are a number of occasions that are reported whereby Shay had used violence against other people, or at least threatened violence against other people. And the fact that she secretly carried a knife with her wherever she went is a real concern.
Friends reveal Shay called her housemate Chucky after the knife-wielding killer doll in the horror film Child's Play, and more sinister details are revealed to the police.
It was a strange relationship. Shaya had a lot of emotional control and influence over her. Her friend was subservient and would do whatever she wanted. She'd run errands, even put on Shaya's socks for her.
She would effectively use her as a house mistress to look after the house, clean up, and on one occasion, I believe she was made to tie Shay's shoelaces for her. You know, that is strange behaviour.
And what Shay Groves did was that she treated her as a slave. Slave in every sense of the word, where she screamed at her, she got her to do her washing, ironing, cleaning, feeding her child, go out and buy food. The dynamics was in such a stage where she was effectively controlling her.
On a couple of occasions, Shaya turned violent towards her as well.
On one occasion, she pulled her around the hair and dragged her throughout the house because the friend had gone out and had not told her where she was. On a second occasion, what she did was that she picked up a nail clip and hit her on the head that caused her to bleed. The friend saying she can blow hot and cold, she can be violent at 1 minute, and within seconds she can turn out to be a normal person.
The police identified controlling behaviour, but they also identified manipulative behaviour. And it transpired that Shay had told a number of people, including Frankie, that she was suffering from cancer and that she was undergoing treatment. And it just didn't exist. It was completely fictitious.
And that is the most vile thing that anybody can think about. And she's manipulating all this and trying to get sympathy, money, and all these kind of things on the pretext of cancer. It is a heinous act.
But according to her acquaintances, Shay's deceit didn't stop there.
One of the chilling and telling features about Miss Grove's personality was her ability to use these sexual footages that she had taken of her having sex with Frankie Fitzgerald, her ex-partner, to manipulate them and to blackmail them to do things. She actually manipulated Frankie Fitzgerald by saying she's going to publish this to the newspapers. There's one occasion where there is the CCTV footage that the police found, and she actually said, if I show this to the police, they will think that you are abusing me.
Shea made threats to post them on social media due to her jealousy and problems in the relationship with Frankie, and wanted to ruin his life.
Shea even sent the sex video to her friends.
It was showing a very violent sexual act taking place without the consent of the other party. So in effect, Shea was being raped by Frankie, and that just wasn't the case. The police were able to get the original footage of this video, and when they analysed it, it was clear that the footage had been edited by Shea.
It was consensual sexual acts, and what she had done is that she had manipulated a number of footages by cutting and pasting them out of time and sending them off to their friends, saying this is how he's been aggressive towards me.
Soon, detectives uncover a chat between Shea and a friend, accidentally picked up on her CCTV. In it, Shea discusses ways to cause Frankie serious damage.
Having received this information that Shea is getting to a point where she wants to either cause Frankie harm directly or get somebody else to cause harm towards Frankie, that really does start to rub against a defence of self-defence that she is starting to show, is starting to now show a pattern of perhaps this is pre-planned. Jay Groves is charged with Frankie Fitzgerald's murder, and a trial date is set at Winchester Crown Court. She attends court, the charges are put towards her, and the defence claim that their client, Shea, is going to be pleading self-defence and also diminished responsibility. And so the prosecution now have to disprove that this was not a case of self-defence or a momentarily loss of control, that this was actually cold-blooded, pre-planned murder.
Six months after the killing of Frankie Fitzgerald in Lee Park, Havant, his girlfriend Shea Groves finally faces justice at Winchester Crown Court. The atmosphere is fever pitch.
There's a lot of public interest in the case, a lot of media there. This is obviously a big story, a national story. A woman who was interested in serial killers, gangsters, true crime. So this was an unusual case and had a lot of interest as a result.
Shea's plea remains not guilty.
And the defence was self-defence as a starting point, and if she was successful, it would have led to a full acquittal, so she would have walked out not guilty verdict. The two defences that reduces murder to manslaughter are loss of control and diminished responsibility. So she would still be sentenced, but the sentence would not be as high as a sentence for murder, which is a minimum term of life.
With the stakes so high, Frankie's sister Carla is also at the trial.
It was horrible, and obviously just straight after Christmas, obviously the first Christmas without Frank. So yeah, it was really difficult. I had like an anxiety attack, I had to go outside. It was a bit much for me. I couldn't really deal with it. I was really nervous. Obviously I've never been to a court even, or even a murder trial.
The prosecution needs to prove that Shea killed Frankie in cold-blooded murder.
In the bedroom, and usually a few weeks before the killing itself, the cameras have been taken down. So we had to rely on telephone evidence, WhatsApp messages, conversations, a camera that was in the kitchen, the housemaid's bedroom, noises in the background. And this, the police officers and we as a prosecution team sat down together and worked together to produce a timeline from the time Frankie Fitzgerald came into the house.
Using this patchwork of evidence, the court relives the last 24 hours of Frankie's life.
So on Saturday, the 16th of July, 2022, we know that Frankie goes to Botley Drive to visit Shay. They're taking cocaine, they've taken alcohol. Again, it's just building up to be this real pressure cooker environment.
I see the CCTV and her and Frankie were in the kitchen playing music and talking, and obviously the songs that he played were the songs he played with me, so that really hurt that they were the last songs he would ever hear. So yeah, that was really heartbreaking.
At about 3 o'clock in the morning on Sunday the 17th of July, Frankie and Shay are both still having arguments about ex-partners.
And obviously we heard her call him up to his own death.
She calls Frankie to come to bed. He goes upstairs and falls asleep. While Shay's going through Frankie's phone, she uncovers a message where a female purporting to be 13 years of age has been contacting Frankie through social media. Now, Shay clearly loses it as a result of seeing that message and gets extremely jealous. But what she didn't know was that Frankie had actually blocked that individual because of the age. And what she also didn't realise was this girl was in fact 17. But that was the final straw that broke the camel's back.
And within a few minutes later, there was the scream.
And she stabs him in the neck.
And then afterwards, she then delivered another 19 blows to his heart and chest area, all of which would have been fatal in themselves.
In a fit of rage, it was a brutal action by the defendant. And the friend said that she had sent a message to her at 5 o'clock in the morning saying that Frankie had left her and there was a big fight. Words to the effect like, he's gone, he's left for the day. The import of the message was that she was setting up a lie.
But then, Shay changes tack, video calling her friend to gloat in the killing. And it was Shay's friend who decided to turn her in.
And the moment she called the police, it was the recording that we played to the jury, which had such a chilling effect, explaining what the defendant had told her about the lies she had created to set up an alibi.
Shay had made admissions to her in the FaceTime call saying that he was asleep and that's when she stabbed him. Shay had made various threats in the past to harm Frankie. If your victim is asleep, how can you feel threatened so much that you have to defend yourself by fatally stabbing somebody? The prosecution were able to show that self-defense just wasn't possible.
Next, it's the turn of Shay Groves herself to take to the stand.
She came across as a very assertive, very controlled, very informative, well-versed with the case. So she was the sort of person who could look after herself. And that portrayed a person who could not have lost control at all.
She came across as rather bolshy and cold and a bit arrogant. She was certainly giving it back to the prosecutor.
When she gave evidence, her reason for why she had told her friend that Frankie was asleep was because she was trying to protect him because of his reputation, children. She didn't want to say anything about him being excessively violent towards her. And now when she walked into the witness box, she was telling the real truth, which we did not accept.
And her version of the truth was that, her and Frankie had been fighting.
She said she'd been pinned on the bed, she was struggling to breathe.
She had reached out to get a money box, but accidentally grabbed a dagger and stabbed him in the neck. I mean, it's almost laughable listening to this account.
But the court is stunned by what Shay says next.
When she gave evidence, she actually admitted that she could actually see him gurgling with blood, and she stabbed him to prevent him from gurgling. In a sense, she was doing him a favor by sending him off.
It's quite a strange thing to hear in court, to hear someone doing that, stabbing someone ferociously when they're dead or dying. It was quite harrowing to hear.
But in dealing with Shay's abuse claims at the hands of Frankie, there are even more harrowing moments for the jury.
There was a sequence of CCTV footages that we had to play to the jury. He was smacking her, and she was saying, "Yes, Daddy, what's my punishment, Daddy?" And he was having sex with her, and then she was crying. It was horrific to look at. 1 or 2 jurors actually were in tears when they saw this. But what the prosecution said, what the Crown said, was that this was all consensual.
She didn't really have a defence, to be honest. He was innocent. He didn't deserve to go like this. No one does.
What we told this jury was that this is a manipulative, jealous, cunning woman, and her jealousy led her to killing him. And that is the reason why he died. This is not a case of self-defense.
The jury retires to consider its verdict.
The jury retired for 4 days. To some people, it was the most agonizing 4 days because you didn't know what was going through their mind. When they came in, it was a hushed courtroom. And this is the point where it's like the drum roll moment.
The verdict was guilty. And it was just the best feeling ever.
And at that point, or in the moments afterwards, while Shay was still in the dock, she smiled, which I found something to be a rather strange reaction, considering she was now going to be spending many years behind bars.
My mum just broke down. Obviously, we were happy she got guilty, but never going to bring Frankie back.
Shay Groves is sentenced to life with a minimum term.
She was sentenced to 23 years, which is some sort of justice, but how many years she got, it's not the end for us.
So she'll be 50 years of age by the time she gets out. She's lost that relationship with her daughter. There's a heavy price to pay for that, all because of jealousy.
He might be gone, but he's left the most amazing memories. Love. 2 beautiful children that will always live in him. And I will miss him for the rest of my life.
I saw something in the distance on the ground. As I got closer, I realised it was actually a body lying there, somebody lying there.
She had been brutally attacked and hit multiple times over the head with a heavy, blunt object.
In all my years of policing service, I've never seen an injury as horrific as this.
When I first got there, I saw a tiny village with police everywhere.
We even had the helicopter up. We had a phenomenal amount of search teams, 60 to 70 officers on the scene every single day. There was a whole sea of blue.
It was clear the police were desperate for any information, anything that could bring them a suspect.
The identity of this person was unknown. It was 7 days into the investigation. I had no idea who was responsible for this.
It wasn't known if it was an isolated incident, and there was fear in the local community.
Whoever had done that clearly could strike again at any time.
In Kent, not far from Dover, lies the small hamlet of Snowdown.
You get just a few miles out of Dover and it's extremely quiet and extremely rural, and people really would go there to get away from the hustle and bustle of city life.
It's tiny, it's a little community, a few houses surrounded by typical Kent countryside, greenery and forest.
It's a very rural area, lots of fields, lots of woodland, and Aylsham is just next door.
I was born here, so I've lived here my whole life, it's 27 years. It's my family home, and we're sort of a couple of generations here as well. Yeah, it's quite a tight community, and you do recognise people when you're walking around the village.
I've been working here for 6 years, and I wave to everybody. People are very friendly. This village is a textbook, a chocolate box village.
It's quite a close-knit community because it's an old mining village. I think everyone tends to know a lot about each other in this village.
Snowdown's the kind of place where it doesn't take a lot to make front page news. The local paper is going to carry news about local fates and things that matter to local people.
There's some rural crime in this area, maybe burglaries and thefts from businesses, things like that, but nothing of significance, no. We'd been out to a local pub, and when we got back about 2:30, myself and my son and daughter decided to go for a walk. It was a really nice sunny day, quite warm for April. We went on a walk that we often do across the fields locally, then do a bit of a loop. It takes about 45 minutes to do the walk. It takes us down to a small wood, half a mile from my house. Very, very pretty little area. The first thing we saw as we went down through the woods was the dog. With Jack Russell, which was on his own. We couldn't see the owner. First off, my daughter managed to get hold of the dog, but the dog wasn't running away or anything. It actually looked a bit scared. I then walked through to the next field to see if I could see anyone. I couldn't see anyone there. I then crossed the footpath to another field, and that's when I saw something sort of in the distance on the ground. It just looked like some clothing, just something colourful a little bit in the distance. I then walked along the side of the field, and as I got closer, I realised it was actually a body lying there, somebody lying there. I called to my son to say, something's happened here. The obvious thing was it was someone who'd collapsed, had a heart attack, something like that. As we looked a bit closer, we realised it was a woman. The jacket hood was over the head and they were face down, so we couldn't actually see anything amiss, really. We called out to see if there was any response, but there was nothing. So then we crouched down next to her and we could tell that there was no movement, so we assumed that they were not alive. We immediately called 999.
The call was made into Kent Police at about 4:08 on that day. Then the first police response was at 4:30, where an initial examination of the body took place.
When the woman's hood is pulled back, Police are shocked to see the extent of her injuries.
She had sustained significant and catastrophic head injuries. In all my years of policing service, I've never seen an injury as horrific as this. The pathologist said that he couldn't specifically say how many blows there were because of the significant trauma, but he said, it could have been up to 10 or more.
Which really gives you an idea of the ferocity of the attack.
What the pathologist did say to me, and I distinctly remember him saying this, was, Gavin, you are looking for something linear, cylindrical, and really heavy on one end. That's what we needed to find.
The woman who has suffered this frenzied and brutal attack is named as 53-year-old Snowdown resident Julia James.
Julia James was a much-loved mother and wife.
She was a lady who had lived in and around Aylsham for all of her life. She was a very, very popular member of the community.
She was a greatly loved mother and grandmother and a very highly regarded and respected PCSO for many years.
Julia joined Kent Police on the 26th of August 2008, where she was a police community support officer.
A passion for her and a real talent was supporting victims of domestic violence. She was really respected for her work, but also as a member of the community herself.
Because Julia was well known in the area, I had personally met her once through my business, so she was a well-known local police officer, yeah.
Julia's body was found in a very rural location, bordering on to Accolt Wood, which falls between Snowdown and Aylsham. We cordoned off the area, preserving any evidence that could be in there so it can't be contaminated in any way. I made the decision that Julia's body was to be recovered. In fact, when I went to see Julia's family, that was one of the questions that I was asked. Did my mum spend all night out there? And she didn't.
The investigation is immediately presented with challenges.
There is no CCTV. There might be some witness opportunities in the form of walkers, but then there might not have been. And that really restricts you to what you're going to do. You then start thinking, right, okay, we've got to get ourselves into gear here. This was a huge investigation.
When I first got there, I saw a tiny village with police everywhere. There were police cars lining the streets. You could see people wearing forensic suits in the field nearby.
Well, I was working here in this unit on the farm, and I was aware of a strange sound in the farmyard that I had not heard before. I opened the door and it was a police sweep. There was a line of police officers sweeping across the farmyard.
In the first day's investigation, police were everywhere trying to find any clues they could about what had happened to Julia. Whether this was police officers on the ground, they were leaving no stone unturned.
There were two CID who spotted me straight away and said, have you heard anything unusual? Have you seen any unusual vehicles? When they interviewed me, they basically wanted to know where I was that day, whether I was here looking for an alibi.
Even those closest to Julia find themselves under police scrutiny, including her husband Paul.
I was very open and honest with him when I met him, knowing full well that in the background there's these inquiries going on. I told him, and I said that he needed to know. He became very emotional at that point, but he had every right to know that we were doing those inquiries, especially in light of the fact that everybody always thinks it's the husband. But with all my experience over the years, I was very comfortable it wasn't Paul.
With pressure mounting on detectives and the killer still at large, fear is spreading through the village.
It's not just perceived danger, it is real danger because, whoever had done that clearly could strike again at any time. And until that person is caught, people will be living in fear.
At this point, it wasn't known if it was an isolated incident, and there was fear in the local community.
And absolutely right that they had their genuine concerns. Would this person strike again?
In the quiet village of Snowdown in Kent, locals are distraught at the news of the death of their neighbour and local PCSO, Julia James.
She'd just gone out for a walk with her dog when she had been brutally attacked and hit multiple times over the head with a heavy blunt object. She'd done a lot of great work within the force, particularly in the area of domestic violence. So by all accounts, she was a lovely lady. And I think, when you start building up a picture of who the victim is, it makes the horror of what's happened to her feel even greater.
As police and the media descend on the area, the village is gripped by the fear that a killer could be in their midst.
This was a tight-knit community that was then suddenly faced with this police operation after one of their beloved neighbours had been brutally attacked. There wasn't a lot of information out and about at the time. People didn't know if this was something that could be repeated.
There was quite a lot of fear in the village, particularly when the press and all the television cameras turned up. I think it made everyone very, very aware of it.
I think one of the most chilling aspects of this is that here you have a woman just doing everyday things, taking the dog for a walk, things that women do, people do every day. And all of a sudden you have a 53-year-old woman being seemingly randomly attacked and bludgeoned to death. If you can't even take a dog for a walk, where can you be safe? So, there's a lot of heightened anxiety and a lot of fear.
This was shocking not just for Julia's tight-knit community in the tiny hamlet where she lived, but also the fact that, again, she was a member of Kent Police. This was one of theirs who had died, and you could really see on the faces of officers that this had taken a toll on them, and it really did draw national outrage and outcry and a real drive to find who had killed her.
While detectives question those in the area at the time of the murder, specialist officers focus on finding physical evidence.
We had a phenomenal amount of search teams. We had to get people in to assist from other forces. We had 60 to 70 search officers on the scene every single day. Forensic recovery dogs at the scene as well. The public could see that there was a whole sea of blue, and by that I mean police officers. In the initial stages of an investigation, you're really looking for things that are foreign to the crime scene in terms of look out of place that could lead to any identification of who the offender could be.
The specialist search unit undertook a fingertip search of the areas around the fields surrounding where Julia's body was found in order to locate anything that might be of significance, so cigarette ends, drinks, cans, lollipop sticks, articles of clothing, anything really that could potentially contain DNA that would allow us to try and link to someone via a DNA database search.
The experienced search teams quickly uncover a mountain of potential evidence.
I think we took receipt of in excess of 100 items. We did obtain some DNA profiles from some of the items. These were searched on the DNA database, and we were able to provide several names to Kent Police.
But with each DNA match comes disappointment. Every lead is a dead end.
What became apparent very quickly is that the identity of this person was unknown. I had no idea who was responsible for this. We didn't have an idea what the motive was. This lady who was out walking her dog on her own and got attacked. And why did she get attacked? Why did she get so brutally attacked?
Then Julia's husband reveals an encounter he and Julia had 2 months earlier.
In the time following Julia's death, her husband gave an interview and he recounted that During her walks out with the dog, she had seen someone acting oddly.
In February 2021, she had identified that person to Paul James when they saw him in that wooded area together.
He was so odd that Julia actually commented that that was a guy that she'd seen before, more than once, lurking around the woods. So clearly Julia James had a bit of a sense that this person could be a danger.
When that information became known to us, we requested an EFIT. Paul provided that EFIT.
It's nearly a week since Julia's murder, and detectives finally have their first real lead in the investigation.
Clearly, the media, the public wanted some answers, and I can hand on heart say for 7 days I didn't have a clue who's responsible.
The police were appealing to the public. Anyone who had seen what happened to Julia or knew anything to come forward. There was a £10,000 reward issued by a charity for anyone who could help bring Julia's killer to justice.
I felt that we worked incredibly well with the media. They kept the story going, and it needed that to help us progress the investigation.
The police put out a lot of appeals for any CCTV around here. And I did actually have some cameras on my business premises, and they came and checked all the footage, took what they wanted.
Gavin and his team decide to harness the power of the media and stage a reconstruction of Julia's last movements.
The idea of the reconstruction was one to see if we could jog anybody's memories.
As the police were carrying out a reconstruction using an actress, they were able to sort of show an image of what she would have looked like on the day. She was wearing a pair of black and purple Wellington boots, which were quite distinctive. She was wearing a pair of jeans, a grey jumper, and she had a distinctive blue branded coat.
We were able to buy some replica clothing, and I even spoke to the family and asked if it was possible if we could use Toby. And the reason I did that was simply because people don't always know the owners, but they know the dogs. And that was an opportunity I wanted to explore.
They took journalists around the field to help with a real visual appeal for people so that people could see where Julia had been and really try and jog people's memories. It's not usual to do reconstructions of this nature. It really felt that the police were trying to do everything they could to bring Julia's killer to justice.
The response from the public was enormous. 1,680 people contacted Kent Police with information. We've had about 530 CCTV downloads, dashcam footage, ring doorbells, and it was enormous.
As detectives examine each and every frame of footage sent in by the public, one in particular stands out.
It was days after Julia had been found dead. There was a local gamekeeper and he'd seen a suspicious character in the past and he'd been keeping an eye on him. And the day after the murder, he spotted the very same person wandering around.
At about 10 to 5 in the afternoon, he saw a man acting suspiciously in one of the fields close to the scene of the murder. That man was carrying a bag. Protruding from that bag was a long implement which was covered in plastic bags. Suspicious of that man, the gamekeeper challenged him, and not being satisfied with the explanation that man was giving as to why he was there, he took some images.
The local gamekeeper reported to say that he'd spoken to this individual and he said that he'd been in the area of the crime scene, which was physically impossible because the amount of police resources, there is no way he would have been able to walk through the fields as he was indicating he'd done so.
The man's apparent lies are a red flag to detectives.
The place is swarming with police officers, whether he's feeling like he's got some kind of a secret and he's enjoying watching them all scurrying around trying to find out who's done this, and he's right there with the murder weapon sticking out of his bag. You know, maybe he's enjoying it. Maybe he's perhaps in his mind goading the police with his presence.
And then when questioned more about it, the individual himself ran off. It was all very suspicious.
It is 10 days since the murder of PCSO Julia James, and police have a potential suspect in their sights.
Some dashcam footage was provided by a gamekeeper. He had challenged the person in a field. He was carrying a bag with a long implement sticking out of it. The gamekeeper thought this man was acting suspiciously and passed a photograph to the police.
The image from the gamekeeper immediately becomes a crucial part of the investigation.
We didn't know the identity of that person. We did have in the incident room the e-fit that Paul had done, and the resemblance was uncanny, and I was quite confident that was one and the same person.
Detectives believe the man stopped by the gamekeeper is the same man Julia James had seen in the woods in the days before her murder. But the decision to release that image to the public in the hope of getting a name is fraught.
First and foremost, it's a big decision to make. I'm not quite sure if they're there as the offender or are they there as a witness. Due consideration to if you're releasing an image of somebody who could be completely innocent. You know, what is the impact on that individual? That could be a lifelong impact. So, you know, it was just something that I knew I had to do. What I didn't want to do, I didn't want to release the whole image, because in that image there was something that could be of significance. There was an item that was protruding from the bag. Was it the weapon that was used?
Concerned that the suspect may destroy evidence, Gavin gives strict instructions on the release of the image.
I want the face released, but I do not want anything to show what was in his bag. I wanted the image cropped.
The investigation dragged on for days and days. It was clear the police were desperate for any information, anything that could bring them a murder weapon, that could bring them a suspect. And it wasn't until 10 days later that there seemed to be a real breakthrough. They put out an image of a man that they wanted to speak to.
We couldn't say if that person was responsible. You know, we were really interested in what that individual was doing there, who that individual was. And then when you connect that to the e-fit, then things were beginning to come together. And that individual was somebody who we really did need to identify.
Within hours, the police have a name.
Callum Wheeler was a 21-year-old local man. He lived essentially in the next village down from Julia James.
He lived with his dad in the Elsham area. The police obviously made huge attempts to try and build up a picture of who Callum Wheeler was.
Very little was known about Callum Wheeler. He'd moved into the area some 2 years beforehand. He kept himself very, very much to himself, even on his mobile phone. You know, lots of people his age have numerous amounts of contacts in their phone. He had hardly anybody. He didn't work. He'd never worked since he'd left school. Yeah, he was a very isolated individual. When the officers attended the house and were directed to the upstairs bedroom where Callum Wheeler was behind a closed door, he barricaded himself behind the door. He pushed his bed to the door. There were two large thuds, and that was something being thrown at the door from inside. The officers were doing their utmost to speak to him in a calm way, to reassure him. Once we were able to gain entry, Callum was positioned in the corner of the room.
Show me your hands. Both hands. Show me hands. Step back, step back, step back. Okay.
He was clearly very agitated. He was swearing at the officers.
Callum. Right. Got him. I've got him. All right. Okay. Calm. Callum, no one's going to hurt you. Nobody's going to hurt you. No one's going to hurt you, okay? Callum, calm. Just relax. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Okay.
No one's going to hurt you, okay? Listen very carefully.
Just
relax. Relax. Listen, look at me. Look at me. Look at me. Okay. Callum, just relax. Just relax. Okay. I'll relax, but I don't want you to bite me. Okay. Just relax. Put handcuffs on you. Okay. Nice. Right. Listen very carefully, Callum. What I'm going to say.
Callum, right. Callum, just listen. My name. I'm going to take my hand away, all right? Callum, are you listening?
You all right?
Hey, we're from Kent Police. Okay, we're not going to hurt you.
Who called you?
Listen, relax. We're not here to hurt you. We're not. You're safe, all right?
God, my blood is flowing.
All right.
All right.
You're going to kill me, you know.
No, we're not.
No. He was quite aggressive. He'd shouted at them. He'd said that somebody had ratted him out. And he made a very curious comment saying that sometimes he couldn't control himself. Couldn't control his actions.
Show me your hands. Both hands. Show me hands.
Inside the bedroom, the police found a large metal pole, nearly a metre long, 3-kilogram railway jack that's used to jack up railway sleepers.
The pathologist said you were looking for something linear, cylindrical, and really heavy on one end.
Callum.
Right, just relax. Callum, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder. Why? Julia James.
I haven't done
it. You were in the area acting suspiciously during the time of the offence, okay? Calm down. You do not have to say anything. You may harm the defence. Stop struggling. You do not have to say anything, or I'll put this on tighter. Okay.
Do you understand me?
All right. Yeah? Just relax.
Listen to what we're telling you.
News of the arrest spreads around the village.
This has gone on for 10 days, and you've got to feel for the local community, and particularly, obviously, Julia's family, who had had to wait for days and days for some news from the police.
There was a week or two where it was actually quite frightening to be out on your own in the woods, because you thought this person could still be there, they could still be out, and they could do something like that again. I think we were relieved when there had been an arrest. Obviously, you do think, well, they haven't been charged yet, so have they got the right person? Is the person who actually did it still out there?
Okay. Was this my mum who said something? No. I think it was. Someone must have told you, but I don't know how do you find out that?
But we're not going to talk. It's not fair for us to talk to you about the offence, okay? Because that's
why am I being dragged into this for? Why?
Well, just because you were seen in the location of the
that doesn't mean anything.
No. But we need to ask you about that in an interview at the police station.
Dragged into this.
Because somebody's been murdered, somebody's dead, so that's why.
When he's interviewed, he denies being involved in Julia's murder. He denies everything and says he's got nothing to do with it.
He answered no comment to all questions. He did give us what is called a prepared statement, effectively saying he had nothing to do with the murder of Julia James. I remember thinking that we've got the right person. What we needed was more evidence.
So I took a phone call from Kent Police. They'd arrested the suspect. So Callum Wheeler's DNA was then sent to me, and we were able to compare his DNA profile to the DNA results we'd previously obtained from Julia's clothing. So it was apparent that Callum Wheeler could be considered as a potential DNA contributor. One of the results from her Wellington boot, and several results from her jacket. A pair of black Nike trainers were recovered from Callum, and blood was found on both the left and the right trainer, and the DNA profiles indicated that the blood could have originated from Julia James.
Callum Wheeler may be refusing to talk, but the forensic evidence is painting a damning picture.
Kent Police found what was described as a metal bar in his bedroom. So the request was, could we examine this bar urgently for any evidence that it had been used as a weapon. The bar was examined in the Saturday evening. We submitted a number of bloodstains and other cellular samples from the carrier bags and from the bar itself for DNA profiling over that weekend. So that was obviously extremely nerve-wracking. So Monday morning came and several of the bloodstains were a match for Julia James. That was obviously a significant turning point for the investigation. A suspect had been arrested, a potential weapon has been recovered, and it subsequently shows blood from a murder victim on this weapon. So massive, as far as the investigation goes, massive.
We charged Callum Wheeler with murder on Monday the 10th of May. I can tell you an absolute euphoric moment for us all, because we knew that we were going to, eventually secure justice for Julia's family in particular, but also for a lot of colleagues within Kent Police who so desperately wanted a positive outcome with this case.
But just as the case looks to be all sewn up, Callum Wheeler throws in a curveball.
He suggested that the police had planted evidence or it had transferred. And I can honestly tell you, we were all incredibly angry at that point. The suggestion that we would stoop to such depths to plant evidence was absolutely outrageous.
Following the death of PCSO Julia James, police have charged the 21-year-old Callum Wheeler with her murder. But he claims their key DNA evidence is corrupt.
He was trying to present that we'd contaminated or transferred DNA, and we needed to show absolutely that was not the case. And we undertook an enormous amount of work to demonstrate the continuity of the forensic evidence. We were able to say which officers were at the scene, how long the exhibits were at the scene, when they arrived at the laboratory.
Show me your hand.
It was also to the extent of making sure that the team who arrested Callum Wheeler had not been anywhere near to the scene, and we had an absolute watertight case and were able to completely and utterly dismiss his ridiculous suggestion.
Faced with such compelling evidence, shortly before the trial, Callum Wheeler accepted responsibility for killing Julia James, but continued to deny her murder. He said that he was not guilty of murder, but was guilty of manslaughter.
Wheeler is not denying Julia died at his hands, but claims he did not mean to kill her. So it is down to the prosecution to demonstrate otherwise.
The prosecution needs to prove not only that the defendant carried out the killing, but that also he had the intention either to kill or to cause really serious harm to Julia James.
As the trial commences, the prosecution starts to build a picture of Julia's last moments.
The evidence from Julia's smartwatch provided us with a picture of her movements in great detail.
To have an attack in the woods be chronicled on a smartwatch it's not something I've ever come across. And it tracked not just where she was, but her heart rate and her speed. They could tell exactly when she left her house, exactly where she was at the moment her heart rate just soared. And she had 2 massive spikes in her heart rate. And that is the moment she sees this suspicious character, and she sees he's got a weapon, and she tries to make a dash for it. So clearly her attacker caught up with her quite quickly, and he pushed or struck her to the ground. And then there's just a few minutes where she's stationary before the heart monitor stops. To have a smartwatch track the moment her attacker was raining blows down onto Julia's head, and then her heart stops. It's quite a sobering thought. The only mercy, perhaps, is that she would have been rendered unconscious very quickly. And I think one of the interesting things is when we're talking about devices, Callum Wheeler switches his phone off before he goes out on the prowl on that day, which for me suggests that he had specifically gone out to find and attack somebody. It's not a spur of the moment thing. This is a pre-planned attack, premeditated murder.
Overlaying smartwatch data with CCTV, the prosecution are able to track Wheeler's movements before the attack.
The prosecution case was that Callum Wheeler had been prowling around the woods, lying in wait in the bushes for a woman with a view to attacking them. The police managed to gather together a huge amount of evidence that proved that Callum Wheeler was in the area at the time. Through CCTV evidence, through eyewitness evidence, they managed to track his route to the woods and back again.
On the afternoon of the 27th of April 2021, Julia James left her home to walk her dog. In the meantime, Callum Wheeler was walking towards the scene. He had with him a railway jack. As Julia James walked towards the wooded area, Callum Wheeler was there, weapon in hand. In the time that followed, he was captured on CCTV walking round the area with that jack handle protruding from his bag.
In terms of demonstrating the intent, quite clearly, the amount of blows that Julia sustained were numerous and they were horrific. And, you know, that in itself is demonstrating quite clear intent. We also know that he did try to conceal some blood that was on the ground near to where Julia was. Some grass had been ripped up and then placed on top of that, again demonstrating his actions of presence of mind.
Wheeler's intent seems clear, but what of his motive?
The police had examined Julia James's clothes. They carried out DNA tests on her wellies, on her coat, and also on her undergarments. Callum Wheeler's DNA was found not just on her outer clothing, but on her vest and in the breast area of her vest. So he had clearly touched her under her outer clothes on the breast. So that was indicative of some kind of sexual motivation.
It was apparent from analysis of Callum Wheeler's computer that in the weeks leading up to the murder, he had visited various adult sites and had also conducted internet searches, one of which was the word raped. After the murder, he had conducted research into the death of Julia James. So far as motive is concerned, perhaps the more significant pieces of evidence were those following his arrest, because when he was at the police station, he made sexually inappropriate remarks to a female officer and repeatedly tried to masturbate. Whilst he was being held in custody, he also made various comments to staff. He said that his case was different because she was a copper. He said Julia James deserved to die. He talked about the wooded area where this took place. He said you can't go to the woods and expect to be safe. He said that if he was released, he would go back and have sex with women without their consent. He said that because raping a woman would satisfy his needs, that would be justified. He said that he would knock them over to get them to the ground. He said he would then rape them and kill them. He said he would assault females and they deserve to die.
Obviously, the comments that he'd made while he was in custody really underlined what he was really thinking when he attacked Julia James.
When the jury went out to deliberate, it's always in the back of your mind, you know, what happens if it's not the result you expect.
When the jury was sent out to consider their verdict, they were only in retirement for just over an hour.
When the jury have been out and deliberating and coming to their conclusion and they file back into the courtroom and the foreperson will stand in front of the judge, there is certainly a silence that falls around the court. Callum Wheeler was found guilty for the murder of Julia James.
The jury were deliberating for some 72 minutes for a case like this, you know, a really short time. And, he was found guilty quite rightly.
Callum Wheeler was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 37 years. So he will not even be considered for parole until he has served every day of that sentence, and will only be released if he is considered to no longer present a danger to the community. Julia James's family sat through this trial. They heard the harrowing detail of this attack, and they conducted themselves throughout with dignity.
You know, for a case like this, with a family coming along and sitting in the courtroom, it was quite a sort of emotional thing to have to see your partner or your mother in that, you know, terrible situation.
Julia James was going about her own business on the day of her murder. She was walking along with her dog. She had every right to feel protected. She had every right to go about her business and to return home. And that was taken away from her. Every woman has the right to feel safe, to feel protected, to walk without fear of any form of violence. And people like me will do everything we possibly can to protect women, make sure that we take people like him away to protect our community.
However long the sentence is, it's not going to bring back Julia James to her family, to her community, and they're forever going to miss her. But I imagine and I hope that the sentence will have brought some comfort to them that at the end of a very, very long journey, there had been justice for Julia.
I can't explain how much I love her. You have to feel that. You can't tell that in words. This guy's took it away from us. But she'll never leave me.